Welcome to our channel, where history whispers secrets of the past. Tonight we'll explore the incredible lives of powerful queens who shaped our world. If you're enjoying these historical journeys, please like and subscribe for more stories. I'm curious, where are you watching from? And what time is it in your corner of the world? Settle in as we embark on a fascinating exploration of 20 extraordinary queens who wielded remarkable power and forever changed the course of human history. Cleopatra, 7th of Egypt. Cleopatra, 7th of Egypt. In the fading twilight of the Ptolemaic dynasty emerged a woman whose name would echo through millennia. Cleopatra, 7th Philopater. Born in 69 BCE into a world where power was the domain of men, Cleopatra would rise to become the last active ruler of the Egyptian kingdom, a pharaoh whose intelligence and political acumen would challenge the expanding might of Rome. Unlike her predecessors, who rarely bothered to learn the Egyptian language, Cleopatra embraced the culture of the land she ruled, speaking the native tongue alongside at least 8 other languages. As a young princess, Cleopatra received an education befitting the Ptolemaic tradition. Comprehensive studies in literature, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and rhetoric at the legendary Library of Alexandria. Growing up in the royal court, she observed firsthand the dangerous game of politics, where siblings turned against one another in deadly power struggles. When her father, Ptolemy Thwondathene, died in 51 BCE, of the throne passed to 17-year-old Cleopatra and her younger brother Ptolemy Phethens, whom she was expected to marry according to Egyptian royal tradition. The relationship between the royal siblings soon deteriorated. Ptolemy's advisors, seeing opportunity in removing the strong-willed Cleopatra, forced her into exile in 49 BCE. A lesser woman might have accepted defeat, but Cleopatra began gathering forces along Egypt's border. Fate intervened when Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria pursuing his rival Pompey. Recognizing Caesar as her path back to power, Cleopatra made what became perhaps the most legendary entrance in political history. Smuggled into the palace wrapped in a carpet, unfurled at Caesar's feet. What transpired between Caesar and Cleopatra that night transformed Egyptian history. The 21-year-old queen captivated the 52-year-old Roman general with her extraordinary intelligence and charm. Caesar, recognizing both her political legitimacy and personal magnetism, sided with her against her brother. The subsequent Alexandrian War ended with Ptolemy Phethens drowning in the Nile while fleeing battle, leaving Cleopatra restored to her throne with another younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, as her new co-ruler and husband. The relationship between Cleopatra and Caesar blossomed beyond political alliance. She bore him a son, Ptolemy Caesar, nicknamed Caesarion, Little Caesar. When Caesar returned to Rome, Cleopatra followed with their child, establishing herself in Caesar's villa across the Tiber. Her presence scandalized Roman society, as did Caesar's placement of her golden statue in the Temple of Venus Genetrix. Yet, for Cleopatra, this Roman sojourn served both personal desires and state interests, securing Egypt's independence through intimate diplomacy. Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE left Cleopatra vulnerable. She quickly returned to Alexandria, where soon after her brother husband Ptolemy XIV died suddenly, possibly poisoned at her command. Cleopatra then elevated her son Caesarion to co-regent, declaring him Ptolemy XIV. As civil war erupted in Rome between Caesar's assassins and his supporters led by Mark Antony and Octavian, Cleopatra bided her time, carefully determining where to place Egypt's crucial support. The decisive moment came in 41 BCE when Mark Antony, now ruler of Rome's eastern provinces, summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus to answer charges she had aided his enemies. Understanding what was at stake, Cleopatra orchestrated another magnificent entrance. She arrived on a golden barge with purple sails, its oars moving to the sound of flutes, harps, and pipes. Silver-dressed attendants posed as cupids, while Cleopatra reclined beneath a canopy of cloth of gold, styled as the goddess Venus. The strategy worked brilliantly. Mark Antony, a military man with a weakness for luxury and drama, was utterly entranced. What began as a political meeting evolved into one of history's most famous love affairs. Antony followed Cleopatra back to Alexandria, where he spent the winter of 4140 BCE in lavish entertainment while neglecting his duties. The relationship proved mutually beneficial. Cleopatra gained a powerful Roman protector, while Antony received financial support for his military campaigns. Their partnership deepened over the years and produced 3 children, the twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and later Ptolemy Philadelphus. In the famous Donations of Alexandria ceremony in 34 BCE, Antony publicly distributed territories to Cleopatra and their children, effectively recognizing them as a royal family spanning both Egyptian and Roman worlds. This act, while cementing Cleopatra's power in the east, provided her enemy Octavian perfect propaganda material in Rome. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir, portrayed Antony as a man bewitched by a foreign queen, abandoning Roman virtues for Eastern decadence. The conflict between the two men escalated into civil war. The decisive Battle of Actium in 31 BCE saw Octavian's forces triumph over the combined fleet of Antony and Cleopatra. The lovers fled back to Alexandria, where their alliance and romance would reach its tragic conclusion. With Octavian's forces advancing on Alexandria in 30 BCE, Antony received false news that Cleopatra had died. Devastated, he fell on his sword. Carried to Cleopatra's monument, where she had barricaded herself, he died in her arms. Cleopatra, facing the prospect of being paraded through Rome in Octavian's triumph, chose a similar fate. According to ancient sources, she arranged for a poisonous snake, an ASP, to be smuggled to her in a basket of figs, embracing death rather than humiliation. Cleopatra's legacy extends far beyond her dramatic end. During her 21-year reign, she maintained Egypt's independence through shrewd diplomacy and personal relationships in an era when Rome was consuming kingdoms. She revitalized Egypt's economy, restored temples, and presented herself as the reincarnation of Isis to her Egyptian subjects, while dealing with Romans as their intellectual equal. She was a naval commander, linguist, and administrative reformer who minted her own coins, one of the few women of antiquity to do so. The Egypt that Cleopatra ruled became, after her death, merely another Roman province. Her son Caesarion was executed on Octavian's orders, while her children with Antony were taken to Rome and raised by Antony's former wife. Her daughter, Cleopatra Selene, later became queen of Mauritania, extending the bloodline of Egypt's last pharaoh. With Cleopatra's death ended not just a dynasty, but 3,000 years of pharaonic rule. Egypt would not regain its independence until modern times. In death, Cleopatra became more powerful than in life, transformed through Roman propaganda, Renaissance drama, Hollywood cinema, and countless artistic representations into a symbol of feminine power, seduction, and exotic mystery. Yet behind these projections stood a ruler of exceptional ability who successfully navigated the male-dominated power politics of her age. Not primarily a seductress, but a shrewd strategist who used every available tool, including personal relationships, to preserve her nation's sovereignty against impossible odds. Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom. Alexandra Victoria was born on May 24, 1819, to the Duke and Duchess of Kent. Her childhood was sheltered and strictly controlled. under what became known as the Kensington system, devised by her mother and her comptroller, Sir John Conroy. This rigid upbringing was designed to make young Victoria dependent on them, but instead fostered in her a deep sense of independence and strength of will. The death of her father when she was just 8 months old placed her directly in line for the throne, though few could have predicted the profound impact she would eventually have on Britain and the world. When King William IV died on June 25th, 1837, Victoria awoke to discover she was Queen of the United Kingdom at just 18 years of age. Her first act was significant. She moved her bed from her mother's room, marking her independence. Despite her youth and diminutive stature, she stood barely 5 feet tall. Victoria embraced her royal duties with remarkable assurance. At her coronation in Westminster Abbey the following year, she conducted herself with a dignity that impressed the nation. This young woman, who had never been allowed to walk downstairs without holding someone's hand, now held the destiny of an empire in her own. Victoria's early reign was guided by her first Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, for whom she developed a deep affection. He became a father figure and political mentor. However, the most significant relationship of her life began in 1839 when her cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, visited England. Though initially reluctant about marriage, Victoria found herself utterly captivated by Albert's handsome appearance and intellectual depth. As queen, protocol dictated that she propose to him, which she did in October 1839. They married on February 10, 1840, beginning what would become one of history's most devoted royal partnerships. Their marriage proved extraordinarily fruitful, producing 9 children between 1840 and 1857. Unlike many monarchs who remained distant from their offspring, Victoria was deeply involved in her children's lives, though she famously disliked pregnancy and childbirth. Prince Albert became not just the Queen's husband, but her closest advisor and effective co-ruler. He modernized the monarchy, championed educational reform, and conceptualized the Great Exhibition of 1851, a spectacular showcase of British industrial might that symbolized the nation's global supremacy. Their domestic happiness became a model for the nation, transforming the monarchy's public image. Tragedy struck in December 1861 when Albert died of typhoid fever at just 42. Victoria was devastated beyond measure. She retreated into profound mourning that would last the remainder of her life, nearly 4 decades. She wore black exclusively, had Albert's rooms preserved exactly as he left them, and withdrew from public duties so completely that she became known as the Widow of Windsor. Her prolonged seclusion led to public criticism and even Republican sentiment. Yet, even in her grief, she continued to rule, conducting state business from behind the scenes through correspondence with her ministers. Victoria gradually returned to more visible duties in the 1870s, encouraged partly by her relationship with her Scottish servant, John Brown. Their close friendship sparked rumors and scandals, even generating the nickname Mrs. Brown for the Queen. Her political influence remained considerable throughout this period. She developed varying relationships with her prime ministers. She detested Gladstone, considering him pompous, but formed a remarkable bond with Benjamin Disraeli, who flattered her masterfully and crowned her Empress of India in 1876, acknowledging Britain's imperial dominance and Victoria's paramount position in the world. The latter decades of Victoria's reign saw Britain reach the zenith of its global power. The empire expanded across nearly a quarter of the Earth's land surface, encompassing 400 million subjects of vastly diverse cultures and languages. Victoria's image appeared throughout these dominions, a unifying symbol of imperial authority. She took particular interest in India, learning Hindustani phrases and employing Indian servants. The Diamond Jubilee celebration of 1897, marking her 60 years on the throne, became a spectacular display of imperial might. with representatives from across the globe converging on London for an unprecedented demonstration of Britain's worldwide reach. Victoria's influence extended beyond politics and empire into the very fabric of society. The Victorian age became synonymous with a distinctive set of values: moral strictness, family devotion, duty, and industrial progress, tempered by rigid class hierarchies. Through her children and their marriages, Victoria became literally the grandmother of Europe, with descendants placed on the thrones of Germany, Russia, Spain, Romania, Norway, and Greece. This royal network created family ties between nations that Victoria hoped would ensure peace, though ironically, these same connections would later play a role in the tensions leading to World War I. Queen Victoria died on January 22, 1901, at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, ending the longest reign in British history to that point. She was 81 years old and had ruled for 63 years. The world she left behind had been transformed beyond recognition from the one into which she had been born. Steam power, electricity, telegraphs, railways, photography, technological marvels had reshaped society. Britain stood as the preeminent global superpower with an empire of unprecedented size. Victoria herself had evolved from an inexperienced teenager into a national matriarch whose very name defined an era. Victoria's legacy remains immense. She transformed the British monarchy from an institution of declining relevance into a symbol of national and imperial unity. Her emphasis on family values and moral propriety influenced generations, while her name adorns cities, lakes, mountains, and monuments across the world. Though the empire she presided over has long since dissolved, Queen Victoria's impact on history, culture, and the very concept of female leadership continues to resonate. In her strength, her vulnerability, her duty, and her unwavering sense of purpose, she remains the quintessential image of a monarch, the woman whose reign became synonymous with an age, Wu Zetian of China. In the sprawling tapestry of Chinese imperial history, only one woman ever ruled as emperor in her own right. Wu Zetian, born in 624 CE during the Tang Dynasty, would rise from humble beginnings to command the most powerful empire on earth. Her journey from imperial concubine to absolute ruler broke every convention in a deeply patriarchal society, leaving an indelible mark on Chinese civilization that resonates to this day. The story of Empress Wu is one of extraordinary ambition, political genius, ruthless determination, and profound cultural impact. Her early life gave little indication of her future prominence. Born to a wealthy timber merchant family in Shanxi province, young Wu Zhao received an unusually comprehensive education for a girl of her time. She learned to read and write, studied poetry and history, and absorbed the Confucian classics alongside Buddhist teachings. These intellectual foundations would serve her well throughout her remarkable life. At just 14 years old, her beauty and intelligence earned her a place as a fifth-ranked concubine in Emperor Taizong's court, where she was given the name Mei Niang, beautiful lady. For 13 years, Wu served in Taizong's harem, largely unnoticed among hundreds of consorts. When Taizong died in 649, convention dictated that his concubines without children should have their heads shaved and live out their days as Buddhist nuns. Wu briefly entered a temple, but her story was far from over. Through circumstances still debated by historians, she managed to attract the attention of Taizong's son and successor, Emperor Gaozong. Despite the taboo against a son taking his father's concubine, Gaozong was captivated by Wu and brought her back to court. In the imperial palace, Wu quickly rose from the lowly position of ninth-rank concubine to become Gaozong's favorite. Her intelligence and political instincts proved invaluable to the emperor, who increasingly relied on her counsel. By 655, she had outmaneuvered Empress Wang and consort Xiao, convincing Gaozong to depose Wang and elevate Wu to the position of empress. The stories of her methods range from political maneuvering to outright accusations of infanticide, allegedly killing her own daughter and framing Empress Wang for the crime. As Empress Wu consolidated her power, Emperor Gaozong began suffering from debilitating illnesses, possibly strokes that affected his vision and ability to rule. By 600 City, Wu was effectively handling all state affairs, with documents requiring the emperor's approval first passing through her hands. When Gaozong died in 683, Wu continued her political ascendance, first ruling through her sons as Empress Dowager. In 690, after deposing her last son, she took the momentous step of declaring herself emperor, not empress, of a new dynasty she called the Zhou. Wu's reign as emperor lasted 15 years, during which China experienced remarkable prosperity and innovation. She instituted significant political reforms that weakened the aristocratic families and strengthened imperial authority. Her system of anonymous, written imperial examinations revolutionized Chinese civil service, allowing talented men of humble origins to enter government based on merit rather than family connections. This system would endure for over 1,000 years, becoming a cornerstone of Chinese governance. In foreign affairs, Wu proved equally capable. She expanded Chinese influence in Central Asia and Korea through a combination of diplomatic skill and military force. Under her rule, the Tang Empire reached its greatest geographical extent. She maintained peace with Tibet through strategic marriage alliances and strengthened China's position along the Silk Road, facilitating trade and cultural exchange across Eurasia. The empire grew increasingly wealthy and cosmopolitan during her reign, with the capital at Chang'an becoming the largest and most sophisticated city in the world. Wu Zetian was a passionate patron of Buddhism, which provided ideological support for her unconventional rule. She commissioned countless temples, pagodas, and Buddhist artworks, including the monumental stone statues at the Longmen Grottos near Luoyang. She promoted Buddhist scripture that prophesied a female ruler who would be a reincarnation of the Buddha. Her religious patronage not only legitimized her authority, but also left an enduring artistic and architectural legacy that remains a treasure of world heritage. The darkness in Wu's story lies in her treatment of rivals. Historical records, admittedly written by Confucian scholars who despised female rule, describe her eliminating entire families who opposed her. She created a secret police force headed by trusted informants who rooted out disloyalty through torture and terror. The notorious flowering plum penalty allegedly involved cutting off the limbs of victims before beheading them. Whether these accounts are factual or exaggerated by biased historians remains debated, but Wu clearly employed ruthless methods to maintain power in a system inherently hostile to female leadership. By 705, the aging Emperor Wu, now in her early 80s, was losing her grip on power. Court officials and her own nephew, Wu Sanzi, orchestrated a coup that forced her abdication. Rather than executing the former emperor, they allowed her to retire with the lesser title of Empress Regnant. She died later that same year and was eventually buried alongside Emperor Gaozong, her position as a legitimate ruler acknowledged despite the efforts to erase her reign from official history. Wu Zetian's legacy is profoundly complex. Confucian historians condemned her as an immoral usurper who violated natural order. Yet her administrative innovations strengthened the Tang dynasty, which continued for another 2 centuries as a golden age of Chinese civilization. Her promotion of meritocracy over aristocratic privilege modernized Chinese governance. Her support of education, arts, and religious tolerance fostered cultural flowering. Today, she is increasingly recognized not merely as a female anomaly in Chinese history, but as one of its most capable and consequential rulers. As the soft moonlight falls on the ancient stones of Chang'an, one can almost imagine Empress Wu moving through her palace, drafting edicts that would reshape an empire. Her story reminds us that history's greatest figures often defy categories and expectations. In the quiet hours of night, we might contemplate this extraordinary woman who, through sheer force of will and intellect, rose to rule the medieval world's most advanced civilization. The legacy of Wu Zetian, China's only female emperor, continues to inspire and challenge our understanding of power, gender, and leadership across the centuries. Catherine the Great of Russia. Born Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, the woman who would become Catherine the Great began life as a minor German princess with modest prospects. Her fate changed dramatically when Empress Elizabeth of Russia selected her as a bride for her nephew and heir, Peter. Arriving in Russia at just 14, Sophie embraced her new homeland with remarkable determination, learning the Russian language and converting to Orthodox Christianity. Upon her conversion, she took the name Catherine, foreshadowing her determination to become Russian in all but birth. Though her marriage to Peter in 1745 proved deeply unhappy, Catherine's ambition and intelligence would ultimately transform both her destiny and Russia's. The young empress endured nearly 2 decades of a troubled marriage to a husband she found increasingly erratic and childish. Peter made no secret of his contempt for Russia and its people, preferring all things Prussian, a dangerous attitude for a future Russian emperor. Catherine, meanwhile, devoted herself to self-education, reading voraciously the works of Enlightenment philosophers. She became particularly well-versed in the writings of Montesquieu, whose ideas on the separation of powers and constitutional governance fascinated her. During these years, Catherine cultivated relationships with key members of the Russian Imperial Guard and nobility, building a network of supporters while her husband alienated nearly everyone at court. In 1762, the situation reached its breaking point. When Empress Elizabeth died, Peter ascended the throne as Peter III and immediately enacted policies that outraged the Russian elite. He made peace with Russia's longtime enemy, Prussia, effectively nullifying years of Russian military sacrifices. He antagonized the powerful Orthodox Church with reforms benefiting Lutherans. Most dangerously, he threatened the privileged position of the Imperial Guard. With rumors spreading that Peter planned to divorce Catherine and possibly imprison her, she acted decisively. With the support of her lover Grigory Orlov and his brothers, who were officers in the Imperial Guard, Catherine executed a bloodless coup in July 1762. Catherine rode through the streets of St. Petersburg in Guard uniform to rally support and was quickly proclaimed Empress of Russia. Peter was arrested and forced to abdicate. Shortly thereafter, he died under mysterious circumstances, officially from hemorrhoidal colic, but more likely strangled by Alexei Orlov, brother of Catherine's lover. Though Catherine likely did not order the assassination, the convenient death of her husband removed a significant threat to her rule. Thus began the 34-year reign of Russia's most consequential empress, a reign that would transform Russia into one of Europe's greatest powers and earn Catherine her epithet, the Great. Catherine's rule embodied the concept of enlightened despotism, governing with absolute authority while embracing Enlightenment ideals. She corresponded regularly with Voltaire, Diderot, and D'Alembert, even inviting Diderot to her court. Her nakaz, instruction, a progressive law code she drafted in 1767, advocated principles of equality before the law and opposed torture and capital punishment. Though the resulting legislative commission failed to enact her most liberal reforms, the document revealed Catherine's intellectual aspirations. She established Russia's first state-funded institution for women's education and initiated smallpox inoculation by having herself and her son inoculated first. Territorial expansion became a hallmark of Catherine's reign. Under her leadership, Russia participated in 3 partitions of Poland, gaining vast territories in what is now Belarus, Lithuania, and Ukraine. Her wars against the Ottoman Empire pushed Russia's borders southward to the Black Sea, while the annexation of Crimea secured warm water ports. Alaska was claimed for the Russian Empire during her rule. By the end of her reign, Russia had grown by approximately 200,000 square miles, with over 7 million new subjects brought under Russian rule. This expansion cemented Russia's status as a European superpower and created the multi-ethnic empire that would endure until 1917. Catherine's cultural impact proved equally significant. She transformed St. Petersburg into one of Europe's most magnificent capitals, commissioning grand architecture like the Hermitage Palace. Her art collecting was legendary. She acquired masterpieces so aggressively that agents across Europe complained about rising prices due to the Russian woman's purchases. Her collection formed the basis of the Hermitage Museum, now one of the world's greatest art repositories. She established the first Russian public theater, commissioned operas, and encouraged Russian literature, helping create a distinctly Russian high culture that blended European influences with native traditions. Despite her progressive ideas, Catherine's reign had profound contradictions. The 1773 Pugachev Rebellion, a massive peasant uprising, terrified the empress and the nobility. In its aftermath, Catherine abandoned many of her more liberal impulses, reinforcing serfdom and the privileges of the nobility. While she criticized despotism in her writings, she ruled as an autocrat who tolerated no challenges to her authority. Her intellectual correspondence with Voltaire coincided with the suppression of free thought within Russia itself. And these contradictions reveal Catherine as both a child of the Enlightenment and a pragmatic ruler determined to maintain power in a volatile empire. Catherine's personal life generated as much fascination as her political achievements. Following her husband's death, she never remarried, instead taking a series of lovers who were often significantly younger than herself. These relationships served both emotional and political purposes, as her favorites frequently received positions, titles, and influence. Her most famous relationship was with Grigory Potemkin, who may have secretly married her and remained a trusted advisor even after their romantic relationship ended. Later in life, her pattern of taking much younger lovers fed rumors and myths about her sexual appetites that persist to this day. When Catherine died of a stroke in 1796, at age 67, she left behind a transformed Russia. The scandalous myths that emerged after her death, particularly the false story involving a horse, have often overshadowed her remarkable achievements. In reality, Catherine was an intellectual, a skillful politician, and a visionary ruler who modernized Russia and established its position as a European power. Her flaws were considerable. She entrenched serfdom and expanded autocratic power. But her reign represented a pivotal moment in Russian history. The German princess who reinvented herself as a Russian empress had indeed earned her title. Catherine the Great. Isabella Brun of Castile, in the heart of medieval Spain, during a time of division and strife, was born a princess who would change the course of history. Isabella of Castile entered the world on April the 22nd, 1451, in Madrigal de las Santas Torres, a seemingly ordinary child destined for extraordinary power. Born to King John II of Castile and his second wife Isabella of Portugal, her early life gave little indication of the formidable queen she would become. The young princess spent her childhood far from court, raised in relative simplicity compared to other royal children of the age. While her half-brother Henry IV ruled Castile, Isabella received an education focused primarily on religion, household management, and the feminine arts. Yet beneath her quiet exterior burned an ambitious intelligence and unwavering resolve. When King Henry named his daughter Joanna as his heir, political intrigue enveloped the young Isabella. Rumors circulated that Joanna was illegitimate, fathered not by the king but by one of his favorites, earning her the nickname La Beltraneja after the supposed father. Isabella's path to the throne emerged through rebellion and political maneuvering, supported by nobles dissatisfied with Henry's rule. She was declared heir to Castile in the Treaty of Toros de Guisando in 1468. This agreement required her to marry only with royal consent, a promise she boldly broke the following year when she wed Ferdinand of Aragon in a secret ceremony. This marriage, initially opposed by her brother the king, would create the foundation for a unified Spain. The wedding between Isabella and Ferdinand represented more than a mere political alliance. It became one of history's most consequential partnerships. Their marriage contract was revolutionary, establishing Isabella as the primary ruler of Castile while preserving her sovereignty. Their motto, Tanto monta, monta tanto, Isabel como Fernando, they amount to the same, Isabella and Ferdinand, reflected their joint rule, though in practice, Isabella maintained firm control over her domain. When Henry IV died in 1474, Isabella moved swiftly to claim her throne, being crowned in Segovia before her rival Joanna could act. The succession crisis erupted into the War of Castilian Succession, with Portugal supporting Joanna's claim. For 5 grueling years, Isabella demonstrated remarkable leadership, sometimes appearing at battlefields wearing armor beneath her royal garments, rallying troops and securing funds for the war effort. Her victory in 1479 finally secured her position as undisputed Queen of Castile. The same year Isabella triumphed in the Succession War, Ferdinand became King of Aragon upon his father's death. Though they ruled their respective kingdoms independently, their coordinated policies and shared vision effectively united Spain under a single crown. This union of Castile and Aragon created the foundation for the Spanish nation we know today, ending centuries of division that had weakened the Iberian Peninsula against outside threats. Perhaps Isabella's most enduring legacy came through her completion of the Reconquista, the centuries-long campaign to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule. The final chapter of this epic struggle centered on Granada, the last Muslim stronghold in Spain. For 10 years, Isabella and Ferdinand waged a methodical campaign, building fortified positions and slowly tightening their grip around the kingdom. In January 1492, the Moorish king Boabdil surrendered Granada, ending nearly 8 centuries of Islamic presence in Iberia. Religious uniformity became the cornerstone of Isabella's vision for a unified Spain. In 1478, she and Ferdinand secured papal permission to establish the Spanish Inquisition, an institution designed to ensure Catholic orthodoxy throughout their realms. Under the first Grand Inquisitor, Tomás de Torquemada, the Inquisition became infamous for its use of torture, public executions, and the terrible spectacle of the auto da fe, where heretics faced judgment. Thousands suffered under its authority. The Queen's religious zeal culminated in 1492, the Alhambra Decree, ordering all Jews to convert to Christianity or leave Spain within 4 months. This edict forced approximately 200,000 Jews to abandon their homes and possessions, devastating communities that had contributed to Spanish culture and economy for centuries. Muslims faced similar persecution, initially being forced to convert and ultimately expelled from Spain in the early 16th century after Isabella's death. The momentous year 1492 marked not only the fall of Granada and the expulsion of the Jews, but also Isabella's most famous patron enterprise, sponsoring Christopher Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic. After initially rejecting his proposal, Isabella reconsidered, providing funds and royal authorization for his expedition. When Columbus returned with news of lands across the ocean, he initiated Spanish colonization of the Americas, forever changing world history and establishing Spain as a global empire. Isabella maintained direct oversight of the emerging Spanish Empire, issuing instructions for the treatment of indigenous peoples in the New World. Though she forbade their enslavement and emphasized their conversion to Christianity, her good intentions failed to prevent the brutal realities of conquest. The systems established during her reign led to centuries of exploitation, disease, and cultural destruction across the Americas, creating a complex and often tragic legacy. In her personal life, Isabella proved a devoted mother to her 5 children, who survived to adulthood. Her careful marriage alliances, particularly her daughter Catherine's marriage to England's Henry V and Joanna's marriage to Philip of Habsburg, positioned her descendants on thrones across Europe. Yet family tragedy struck repeatedly, with her only son and heir Juan dying young, followed by her daughter Isabella and her grandson Miguel, shattering her dynastic dreams. The Catholic monarchs, as Isabella and Ferdinand were known, transformed Spain through administrative reforms, legal codification, and cultural patronage. Isabella supported universities, collected an extensive library, and patronized artists and scholars. She standardized Spanish currency, reformed the military, established hospitals, and improved governance. Her reign witnessed the publication of the first Spanish grammar guide and the flourishing of Spanish arts and literature. As Isabella's health declined in the early 1500s, she carefully prepared for the succession, naming her daughter Joanna as her heir, while appointing Ferdinand as regent if Joanna proved unable to rule. A prescient decision given Joanna's later mental instability. Isabella died on November 26, 1504, leaving a transformed Spain and a global legacy. She was buried in Granada, the city whose conquest represented her greatest military achievement. History remembers Isabella of Castile as a study in contrasts, a pious queen who established the Inquisition, a female ruler who broke gender barriers while reinforcing traditional roles, a visionary who united Spain while expelling diverse communities that had enriched it for centuries. Her reign marked Spain's emergence as a world power and the beginning of the European colonization of the Americas. For better and worse, few medieval monarchs have left such an indelible mark on world history. Hatshepsut of Egypt, in the early morning light of ancient Egypt, around 1478 BCE, a remarkable woman ascended to power in a land where pharaohs were traditionally male. Hatshepsut, whose name means foremost of noble ladies, began her journey to the throne as the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and Queen Ahmose. Born into royalty, she understood from an early age the complexities of Egyptian politics and divine kingship. When her father died, tradition dictated that his son, by a secondary wife, Thutmose II, should take the throne. To secure his position, Thutmose II married his half-sister Hatshepsut, making her the great royal wife, a common practice in ancient Egypt to maintain the purity of royal bloodlines. Their marriage produced a daughter, Neferure, but no male heir. When Thutmose II died after a short reign of only 3 years, his son, by a secondary wife, Thutmose III, was still a young child, too young to rule effectively. As the king's great wife, and with royal blood flowing through her veins, Hatshepsut took her place as regent, ostensibly ruling on behalf of her young stepson. But Hatshepsut was not content to remain in the shadows. In the 7th year of her regency, she made an unprecedented move. She declared herself pharaoh, adopting all the titles and regalia of kingship. This was not a simple act of ambition, but a carefully orchestrated political and religious transformation. She did not depose her stepson entirely. Records show that officially they ruled as co-regents, though Hatshepsut clearly took the dominant role and relegated Thutmose III to the background for nearly 2 decades. To legitimize her unusual position, Hatshepsut created an elaborate mythology surrounding her birth. Temple inscriptions claimed that the god Amun had visited her mother and that Hatshepsut was therefore of divine conception, born to rule by the will of the gods themselves. Artists depicted her coronation with divine approval, showing the god Amun placing the crown upon her head. She further secured her position by appointing loyal officials to key positions, most notably her chief steward and possible lover, Senenmut, who rose from humble origins to become one of the most powerful figures in her government. In official depictions, Hatshepsut transformed her image to align with pharaonic traditions. She was portrayed with the traditional false beard, kilt, and crown of the pharaohs, male attire that symbolized her assumption of the king's role. Yet, in many statues and reliefs, this masculine portrayal retained subtle feminine features, creating a unique visual representation that acknowledged her dual nature as both woman and king. The hieroglyphs referring to her used both feminine and masculine pronouns interchangeably, reflecting this complex identity. Rather than focusing on military conquests as many male pharaohs did, Hatshepsut devoted her energies to establishing trade networks and undertaking massive building projects. Her greatest achievement in foreign relations was the famous expedition to the land of Punt, a mysterious region likely located in modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. The walls of her mortuary temple record this trading mission in vivid detail. Ships laden with myrrh trees, ebony, gold, ivory, and exotic animals returning to Egypt. It was not merely a commercial enterprise, but a demonstration of Egypt's far-reaching influence under her leadership. Hatshepsut's reign was characterized by peace and prosperity. The wealth generated from trade funded an unprecedented building campaign across Egypt. She restored temples damaged during the foreign Hyksos occupation and commissioned new monuments that would stand for millennia. Her crowning architectural achievement was her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, designed by Senenmut. This revolutionary structure, with its dramatic terraced design, nestled against the cliffs of western Thebes, stands as one of ancient Egypt's most beautiful and innovative buildings. The mortuary temple, known as Djeser Djeseru, Holy of Holies, featured colonnaded terraces, ramps, and gardens filled with exotic plants from Punt. Relief sculptures narrated the highlights of her reign, including her divine birth, coronation, and the Punt expedition. Unlike the somber pyramids of earlier pharaohs, Hatshepsut's temple embraced light and space, creating a dramatic approach to the holy inner sanctuary carved directly into the living rock of the cliffs. The temple also served as a shrine to Amun and included a chapel dedicated to Hathor, goddess of love and beauty. After ruling for approximately 22 years, Hatshepsut disappeared from the historical record around 1458 BCE. The circumstances of her death remain unknown, whether from natural causes or otherwise. What followed was more mysterious still. Approximately 20 years after her death, during the later reign of Thutmose III, a systematic campaign began to erase Hatshepsut from history. Her name and image were chiseled from monuments, her statues toppled and broken, her cartouches replaced with those of her father or Thutmose III. This attempt at historical erasure was not necessarily born of hatred or revenge, as once thought. Recent scholarship suggests it may have been an effort to correct the irregular succession and strengthen the legitimacy of Thutmose III's son and heir, ensuring a smooth transition of power. The erasure was selective rather than complete. areas difficult to reach were often left untouched, suggesting practicality rather than fury guided the effort. Whatever the motivation, for millennia, Hatshepsut's achievements were hidden from history, her existence barely acknowledged in king lists. Hatshepsut's legacy remained buried until the 19th century, when archaeologists began deciphering hieroglyphics and excavating her temple at Deir el-Bahari. In 1903, Howard Carter discovered a hidden chamber containing a sarcophagus with her name. Later, in 2007, a tooth found in a wooden box bearing her name led researchers to identify a mummy as potentially being Hatshepsut herself. Through these discoveries, the female pharaoh who ruled as king emerged from historical obscurity, reclaiming her rightful place as one of Egypt's most remarkable rulers. For nearly 2 decades, Hatshepsut presided over a peaceful, prosperous Egypt. She ruled not through force of arms, but through careful political maneuvering, religious authority, and administrative skill. Her reign demonstrated that a woman could successfully take on the most powerful role in one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations. Though ancient hands tried to erase her from history, Hatshepsut's monuments endured and her story survived, a testament to a leader whose vision extended beyond the constraints of gender and whose legacy outlasted attempts to deny her existence. Elizabeth Thrush of England. In the year 1533, a child was born who would change the course of English history. Elizabeth Tudor, daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, entered a world that immediately deemed her unworthy. When her mother fell from her father's favor and was beheaded on trumped-up charges of adultery, Elizabeth was declared illegitimate and removed from the line of succession. Her childhood was marked by uncertainty as she moved through the dangerous landscape of Tudor politics, always at risk, always watching, always learning. Following the death of her father, Elizabeth's young brother, Edward VI, took the throne. During his reign, Elizabeth cultivated a careful persona, the studious Protestant princess who posed no threat. When Edward died and her Catholic sister Mary seized power, Elizabeth's very life hung in the balance. Suspected of involvement in Protestant plots against Queen Mary, Elizabeth was imprisoned in the Tower of London, walking the same path her mother had walked to her execution years earlier. For months, Elizabeth lived with the constant fear of death. When finally released, she was kept under house arrest, closely watched by Mary's spies. Elizabeth survived through extraordinary caution, attending Catholic Mass despite her Protestant beliefs and avoiding any hint of political ambition. These dangerous years shaped the queen she would become, patient, shrewd, and keenly aware that appearances often mattered more than reality in the game of power. When Mary died childless in 1558, Elizabeth ascended to the throne at age 25. Her coronation procession through London revealed her political genius. She presented herself as the people's queen, accessible and loving toward her subjects. She inherited a nation fractured by religious conflict, financially drained, and vulnerable to powerful Catholic neighbors who viewed her as illegitimate. Few expected this young unmarried woman to survive, let alone thrive. From the start, Elizabeth faced intense pressure to marry. Parliament repeatedly urged her to choose a husband who would provide heirs and male leadership. Foreign princes and domestic nobles alike sought her hand. Yet Elizabeth recognized that marriage meant surrendering power and risking England's independence through foreign alliances. She transformed this potential weakness into strength, declaring herself married to England and its people. As the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth masterfully played potential suitors against each other for political advantage. She maintained flirtatious correspondences with princes across Europe, entertained marriage proposals for decades, and used these negotiations to secure favorable trade deals and peace treaties, all while never surrendering her autonomy or England's sovereignty. Her strategy of deliberate ambiguity kept England balanced between competing European powers. In 1588, Elizabeth faced the greatest threat to her rule when King Philip II of Spain launched his invincible armada against England. The Spanish fleet, the largest naval force ever assembled in Europe, aimed to depose Elizabeth and restore Catholicism to England. As the armada approached, Elizabeth delivered her famous speech at Tilbury, declaring she had the heart and stomach of a king, despite the body of a weak and feeble woman. The defeat of the Spanish Armada represented the pinnacle of Elizabeth's reign. Through a combination of English naval prowess, strategic leadership, and fortunate weather, what became known as the Protestant wind, the seemingly invincible Spanish force was scattered and destroyed. This victory transformed England into a major maritime power and solidified Elizabeth's status as a legendary monarch who had defended her nation against overwhelming odds. Beyond political and military triumphs, Elizabeth presided over a cultural flowering unparalleled in English history. Her court became a center of poetry, music, and literature. Edmund Spenser dedicated the Faerie Queene to his monarch. William Shakespeare and his company performed for the Queen, creating plays that explored the complex themes of power, identity, and rule that defined her reign. The Elizabethan era saw English culture reach new heights of artistic achievement. Elizabeth carefully cultivated her royal image through portraits, public appearances, and ceremony. As she aged, she employed increasingly elaborate white makeup, vibrant red wigs, and magnificent gowns encrusted with jewels and symbolic imagery. These weren't mere vanities. They were calculated political statements. Her portraits showed her trampling symbols of war, holding sieves representing virginity, or surrounded by roses and other emblems of England's prosperity. For 44 years, Elizabeth ruled England with remarkable stability. When she died in 1603, she left a transformed nation, Protestant, financially recovered, culturally vibrant, and positioned as a rising power on the world stage. The girl who had once been declared illegitimate and faced execution had become one of history's most successful monarchs. The Elizabethan era stands as a golden age in English history, and Elizabeth herself remains the measure against which all British monarchs are judged. Empress Theodora of Byzantium. In the bustling streets of 6th century Constantinople, few could have predicted that a girl born into the lowest ranks of society would one day rule the most powerful empire in the world. Theodora began her life in poverty, the daughter of a bear keeper at the Hippodrome, the massive chariot racing arena that served as the heart of Byzantine social life. When her father died unexpectedly, leaving the family destitute, young Theodora and her sisters were forced to find their own path to survival in the unforgiving capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. As a teenager, Theodora followed her older sister into a life on the stage, a profession considered only slightly more respectable than prostitution in Byzantine society. The theaters of Constantinople were not venues of high art, but rather places of bawdy entertainment where actresses were expected to provide more than just dramatic performances. Historical accounts, particularly those of the court historian Procopius in his Secret History, paint Theodora's early career in scandalous terms, describing provocative performances and numerous lovers. Whether exaggerated or not, Theodora's early life was undoubtedly difficult and fraught with the dangers that accompanied women of her profession. Sometime in her early 20s, Theodora underwent a profound transformation. She traveled to Alexandria in Egypt, then a center of Christian learning, where she converted to monophysite Christianity, a sect that emphasized the divine nature of Christ. Upon her return to Constantinople, she abandoned her former profession and supported herself as a wool spinner. This marked spiritual awakening would later influence her policies as empress and shape her compassion for society's most vulnerable members, particularly women, in circumstances similar to those she had escaped. Fate intervened when Theodora caught the attention of Justinian, nephew and heir to Emperor Justin III. Despite laws forbidding men of senatorial rank from marrying actresses, Justinian was captivated by Theodora's beauty and intelligence. So determined was he to make her his wife that he persuaded his uncle to change the law. In 525 CE, Theodora and Justinian married, and when Justin died in 527, they were crowned emperor and empress of the Byzantine Empire. From the moment of her coronation, Theodora was no mere consort. She was acknowledged as co-ruler, her name appearing alongside Justinian's on official documents and her face minted on imperial coins. The defining moment of Theodora's reign came in 532 CE during the Nika riots, when what began as sporting rivalries between chariot racing factions erupted into a massive uprising against imperial authority. For 5 days, Constantinople burned as the mob rampaged through the streets, proclaiming a new emperor. As the situation deteriorated, Justinian and his advisors prepared to flee the city. It was then that Theodora delivered her most famous speech, declaring that purple makes a fine burial shroud, meaning she would rather die as empress than live as a fugitive. Her courage galvanized Justinian and his generals. Instead of fleeing, they devised a plan to crush the rebellion. Soldiers under the command of Generals Belisarius and Mundus trapped the rioters in the hippodrome and slaughtered them. Some 30,000 people died that day. While brutal, this decisive action saved the empire and solidified Theodora's position as not just an empress in name, but a ruler whose judgment was essential to the survival of Byzantium. From this point forward, Justinian would never make important decisions without consulting his remarkable wife. Throughout her reign, Theodora used her influence to enact legislation that improved the status of women. She supported laws that prohibited forced prostitution, gave women more rights in divorce proceedings, allowed women to own and inherit property, and established severe penalties for rape. She created a safe house called the metanoia, or repentance, where former prostitutes could live in security. These reforms were revolutionary for their time and reflected Theodora's understanding of the vulnerable position of women in Byzantine society, vulnerabilities she had experienced firsthand. The most magnificent testament to Theodora and Justinian's joint rule stands to this day, the Hagia Sophia. After the original church was destroyed during the Nika riots, the imperial couple commissioned a new structure of unprecedented grandeur. Completed in 537 CE, its massive dome seemed to float above the ground, prompting Justinian to declare, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." Inside this architectural marvel, brilliant mosaics once depicted the imperial couple in their glory. Though many of these were later destroyed in the Church of San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy, magnificent mosaics still show Theodora in her imperial regalia, a powerful visual testament to her authority. Theodora's life came to an early end in 548 CE when she succumbed to what was likely cancer at approximately 48 years of age. Justinian was inconsolable at her death and continued to rule for nearly 2 decades without her, though never with the same dynamic energy that had characterized their joint reign. Theodora's legacy lives on not only in the buildings and laws she helped create, but in the remarkable story of her rise from the most humble beginnings to become perhaps the most powerful woman of the medieval world, a transformation so complete and so unlikely that it continues to captivate our imagination 15 centuries later. Queen Nzinga of the Ndongo and Matamba. In the lush landscapes of southwestern Africa during the early 17th century, a remarkable woman rose to power who would defy European colonialism for decades. Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba, born around 1583, emerged as one of Africa's most formidable leaders during a time of expanding Portuguese influence. Her story begins in the kingdom of Ndongo, located in what is now Angola. where from an early age she was groomed to understand the intricacies of governance and the art of diplomacy. Her father, King Kiluwanji, recognized her exceptional intelligence and leadership potential. Breaking with tradition, he allowed young Nzinga to accompany him to important state meetings and military campaigns. She learned to hunt, fight, and lead alongside the men of her kingdom. This unconventional education prepared her for the extraordinary challenges she would face in protecting her people's sovereignty against Portuguese encroachment. The Portuguese had established a colony at Luanda in 1575, and their appetite for territorial expansion and slave trading posed an existential threat to the kingdom of Ndongo. Upon her brother's ascension to the throne in 1617, Nzinga's diplomatic skills were put to immediate use. The Portuguese had intensified their military pressure on Ndongo, forcing her brother, King Ngola Mbandi, to send her as an emissary to negotiate with the Portuguese governor João de Sousa Correia in Luanda in 1622. This meeting would become the stuff of legend and reveal Nzinga's extraordinary character and cleverness. When she arrived at the governor's palace, she discovered a calculated insult awaiting her. The Portuguese governor had arranged only one chair for himself, leaving Nzinga to sit on a floor mat, a clear attempt to establish her inferiority. Refusing to accept this humiliation, Nzinga signaled to one of her attendants, who immediately dropped to hands and knees. The queen then sat on the attendant's back, positioning herself at eye level with the governor. This bold act of defiance demonstrated that she would engage only as an equal, not as a subordinate. The Portuguese were both shocked and impressed by her audacity and dignity. During these negotiations, Nzinga further demonstrated her diplomatic acumen. She secured a treaty that temporarily halted Portuguese advancement and established trade relations. As part of these negotiations, she made another strategic decision. She agreed to be baptized as a Christian, taking the name Dona Ana de Sousa. This conversion was likely more political than spiritual, allowing her to strengthen her position and gain allies within the Portuguese religious establishment. Nzinga understood that survival in this new world required both resistance and adaptation. When her brother died in 1624, possibly by suicide after military defeats or perhaps poisoned, Nzinga seized power and became ruler of Ndongo. The path to her throne was not straightforward. She had to eliminate her nephew, the rightful heir, according to traditional succession rules. This act of ruthlessness revealed another aspect of Nzinga's character, her absolute determination to secure power when she believed it necessary for her people's survival. Once in command, she refused to comply with Portuguese demands for tribute payments and slave trading concessions. The Portuguese, angered by her defiance, backed a rival claim to the throne and drove Nzinga from Ndongo in 1626. Rather than surrender, she retreated to the neighboring kingdom of Matamba, where she established a new power base. She united diverse communities under her leadership and transformed Matamba into a formidable military state. Nzinga displayed remarkable adaptability, incorporating Portuguese weapons and tactics into her army while maintaining traditional fighting methods. She personally led troops into battle well into her 60s, inspiring fierce loyalty. Nzinga's military campaigns were complemented by shrewd alliance building. She welcomed runaway slaves into her army, creating a haven for those escaping Portuguese captivity. She formed alliances with the Dutch when they briefly controlled Luanda between 1641 and 1648, playing European powers against each other. She also united with the Imbangala, fierce warriors known for their combat skills, adopting some of their practices and becoming their leader, another unprecedented achievement for a woman in that society. For nearly 4 decades, Queen Nzinga successfully prevented the Portuguese from controlling the interior of Angola. Through a combination of diplomatic maneuvering, military resistance, and strategic adaptation, she preserved the independence of her realms during an era when many African states fell to European colonization. Her resistance forced the Portuguese to negotiate with her repeatedly, eventually leading to a peace treaty in 1657 that recognized her sovereignty and returned her sister, who had been held hostage. Queen Nzinga died in 1663 at the age of 81 after securing religious freedom for her people as part of her final negotiations with the Portuguese. Her legacy lives on as an icon of resistance to colonial oppression. In modern Angola, she is revered as a national hero, with statues erected in her honor and her image appearing on currency and stamps. Her story has inspired liberation movements across Africa and throughout the African diaspora. Queen Nzinga demonstrated that effective resistance to colonialism required not just military might, but political wisdom, cultural flexibility, and uncompromising dignity. Empress Dowager Cixi of China. From a low-ranking concubine to the most powerful woman in China, Empress Dowager Cixi's story is one of extraordinary ambition and political cunning. For nearly half a century, she controlled the destiny of one-third of the world's population, ruling from behind a yellow silk screen in the Forbidden City. Born in 1835 to a family of Manchu government officials, her exceptional beauty and intelligence led to her selection as a concubine for the Xianfeng Emperor when she was just 16 years old. Within the rigid hierarchy of the imperial household, Cixi initially held the humble rank of sixth-grade concubine, a position of little influence or notice. However, her fortunes changed dramatically in 1856 when she gave birth to the emperor's only son. This single event would transform her life and the course of Chinese history. When the Xianfeng Emperor died in 1861, their son, only 5 years old, became the Tongji Emperor. In the power vacuum that followed, Cixi orchestrated a coup against the regents appointed by her late husband. Working with the late emperor's empress consort, Cixi seized power and had the original regents executed or forced into suicide. She established herself as the true power behind the throne, ruling in the name of her son. The young emperor would never exercise a real authority. She installed herself and Empress Zhen as co-regents, but there was never any doubt about who was truly in control. From behind screens that hid her from male officials, as protocol demanded, she issued edicts and made decisions that would shape China's destiny. When her son died in 1875, likely from smallpox, though rumors suggested other causes, Cixi continued her hold on power by placing her 3-year-old nephew on the throne as the Guangxu Emperor. Though she officially retired in 1889 when the young emperor came of age, she maintained considerable influence. In 1898, the Guangxu Emperor attempted to implement sweeping reforms known as the 100 Days Reform. Cixi swiftly crushed this initiative, placing her nephew under house arrest for the remainder of his life. Cixi's relationship with modernization was complex and contradictory. On one hand, she supported some modest reforms, including the development of railways, modern coal mines, and telegraph lines. She established China's first modern navy and army schools. On the other hand, she resisted fundamental changes to China's political structure and social order. She diverted funds meant for the Navy to rebuild and expand her magnificent summer palace, leaving China vulnerable to foreign powers during a time of increasing colonial ambition. The summer palace became a symbol of Cixi's extravagance. After the original old summer palace was destroyed by British and French forces in 1860, she devoted vast resources to creating a new imperial retreat of breathtaking beauty. With its artificial lake, exquisite gardens, and thousands of architectural wonders, the Summer Palace showcased both the grandeur of Chinese aesthetics and Cixi's personal indulgence. Most notoriously, she used funds earmarked for the Chinese Navy to build a marble boat, a landlocked vessel that symbolized the misplaced priorities of her regime. Cixie's lifestyle was legendary in its opulence. Her meals reportedly consisted of over 100 dishes, though she would only taste a few morsels from each. Her passion for theater saw her maintain a private opera troupe of 200 performers. She traveled with an entourage of hundreds, including eunuchs who attended to her every need. Her elaborate clothing, adorned with pearls and jade, and her extensive jewelry collection, including her trademark 3-foot-long fingernail guards, all contributed to an image of imperial excess even as China's position in the world deteriorated. The most devastating crisis of Cixie's rule came with the Boxer Rebellion of 1900. Initially supporting the anti-foreign Boxers, she declared war on all foreign powers, a disastrous miscalculation. When the Eight-Nation Alliance defeated the Boxers, Cixie fled Beijing disguised as a peasant. Upon her return, she was forced to accept humiliating terms from foreign powers, massive indemnities, and the presence of foreign troops in Beijing. This debacle accelerated the decline of Imperial China and revealed the fundamental weaknesses of her rule. In her final years, perhaps recognizing the inevitability of change, Cixie initiated some reforms she had previously opposed. She abolished the traditional civil service examination system, approved a constitutional form of government, and sent students abroad to study modern subjects. However, these belated reforms came too late to save the Qing dynasty. When she died in 1908, at the age of 72, she had ruled China for 47 years. In a final act of control, she allegedly had the Guangxu Emperor poisoned the day before her own death. Cixie's legacy remains deeply contested. To some, she was a tyrannical despot who accelerated China's decline through her conservatism and corruption. To others, she was a capable ruler who navigated impossible circumstances as a woman in a patriarchal system facing unprecedented foreign threats. What remains undeniable is her remarkable political acumen and tenacity. Just 3 years after her death, the Qing dynasty collapsed, ending over 2,000 years of imperial rule in China, a system that had endured in large part through her determination far longer than it might have otherwise. Maria Theresa of Austria. In the annals of European history, few monarchs faced as many challenges upon their ascension as Maria Theresa of Austria. When her father, Emperor Charles VI, died in October 1740, the 23-year-old found herself the sole female heir to the vast Habsburg dominions, a collection of territories spanning Central Europe, including Austria, Hungary, Croatia, Bohemia, Transylvania, and parts of Italy. Though Charles had spent years securing acceptance for his pragmatic sanction, a legal mechanism ensuring Maria Theresa could inherit his lands, neighboring powers saw her gender as weakness and moved quickly to dismember the Habsburg territories. Despite having no experience in governance or warfare, Maria Theresa responded with remarkable resolve when Frederick II of Prussia invaded her province of Silesia mere weeks after her father's death. This aggressive act sparked the War of Austrian Succession, an 8-year conflict that tested the young ruler's determination. Although she ultimately lost Silesia, Maria Theresa preserved the majority of her inheritance through a combination of diplomatic acumen and personal courage. She traveled to Hungary, appealing directly to the Hungarian nobility while holding her infant son, the future Joseph II, securing their crucial support in her darkest hour. While fighting to defend her throne, Maria Theresa also fulfilled the traditional royal duty of producing heirs with remarkable dedication. Her marriage to Francis Stephen of Lorraine, a love match unusual for royal unions of the period, produced 16 children over 20 years. This extraordinary maternal feat earned her the nickname the Great Mother of Europe, as her children formed a network of dynastic alliances across the continent. Her youngest daughter, Maria Antonia, would become the infamous Marie Antoinette of France, whose tragic end during the French Revolution Maria Theresa would not live to witness. Once her position was secure, Maria Theresa emerged as a reforming monarch who modernized the Habsburg state while remaining deeply traditional in her personal values. Recognizing the administrative weaknesses that had nearly cost her the throne, she initiated sweeping reforms to strengthen her realms. She centralized the government, created a standing army of 108,000 men, doubled state revenues through tax reform, and established the first Austrian civil service based on merit rather than noble birth. Her administrative innovations transformed a patchwork of territories into a more cohesive state. Education stood at the heart of Maria Theresa's reform program. Though personally conservative, she recognized the need for an educated population. She established universal primary education in 1775, making Austria one of the first European nations to mandate schooling for both boys and girls. She reformed universities, founded medical schools, and established the Imperial and Royal Academy of Science and Arts. These educational innovations served both practical and ideological purposes, creating more capable subjects while ensuring education remained firmly under Catholic influence. Despite her progressive policies, Maria Theresa remained a devout Catholic whose faith shaped her worldview. She considered herself a servant of God first and foremost, viewing her role as a divine responsibility. This religious conviction led her to reject many Enlightenment ideas sweeping through Europe. She maintained strict censorship, persecuted Protestants and Jews at various points in her reign, and viewed religious homogeneity as essential for state stability. This stance placed her increasingly at odds with her son and co-regent Joseph II, whose more radical Enlightenment views created tension in her later years. The apparent contradiction between Maria Theresa's traditional values and reformist policies made her a complex ruler who defies simple categorization. She improved the lives of peasants by limiting the labor they owed to landlords, while simultaneously strengthening the authority of the state. She reformed education while censoring books. She corresponded with Enlightenment thinkers, yet remained deeply skeptical of their more radical ideas. This pragmatic approach reflected her primary concern, strengthening the Habsburg state her children would inherit. When Maria Theresa died in 1780 after a 40-year reign, she left behind a transformed realm. Though she never used the title Empress in her own right, her husband held the imperial title. She had governed as effectively as any emperor before her. Her son, Joseph II, continued and expand her reforms, often in directions she would have opposed. The Habsburg monarchy she preserved would endure until World War I, lasting nearly 140 years after her death. In a century known for its enlightened despots, Maria Theresa stands as perhaps the most successful, a ruler who modernized her state while remaining true to her core convictions. Queen Liliuokalani of Hawaii, in the gentle waves of the Pacific, on an archipelago of breathtaking beauty, rose a queen whose destiny became intertwined with the fate of her nation. Queen Liliuokalani, born Lydia Kamakaeha in 1838, emerged as Hawaii's last monarch during a period of intense colonial pressure. Her story unfolds against a backdrop of swaying palms and encroaching foreign powers, a tale of resistance, dignity, and unwavering love for her people and their sovereignty. The young princess grew up in a Hawaii already transformed by Western contact. The daughter of high chiefs, she was adopted in the Hawaiian tradition by Abner Paka and Laura Konia, members of the royal household. Her childhood blended traditional Hawaiian culture with Western education. Musically gifted, Liliuokalani composed over 160 songs throughout her life, including the hauntingly beautiful Aloha Oe, which became an anthem of Hawaiian identity and longing. As a child, Liliuokalani studied at the Royal School alongside other future Hawaiian leaders. She developed into a woman of remarkable intelligence, artistic talent, and political acumen. In 1862, she married American-born John Owen Dominus, governor of Oahu and the son of a sea captain. Their union brought her into greater contact with American society, while she maintained deep connections to her Hawaiian heritage. Throughout her early adulthood, she watched as her nation's independence slowly eroded. Her brother, King Kalakaua, ascended the throne in 1874 and appointed Liliuokalani as heir apparent in 1877. During his reign, Kalakaua struggled against the increasing dominance of American sugar planters and businessmen. In 1887, these foreign interests forced him to sign the Bayonet Constitution, stripping the monarchy of much of its power and restricting Native Hawaiians' voting rights while extending privileges to foreign residents. Liliuokalani observed these developments with growing concern. When King Kalakaua died in 1891, Liliuokalani ascended to the throne at the age of 53. Her path to leadership had not been expected in her early years, yet she embraced her responsibility with determination. Almost immediately, she began working to restore power to the Hawaiian monarchy and constitutional rights to her people. She drafted a new constitution that would return authority to the crown and restore voting rights to Native Hawaiians who had been disenfranchised by the Bayonet Constitution. The Queen's efforts alarmed the American business interests who had come to dominate Hawaii's economy and political landscape. Sugar planters, missionary descendants, and American businessmen saw their privileged position threatened by Liliuokalani's proposed reforms. On January 17, 1893, these foreign business interests, supported by the U.S. Minister to Hawaii and a contingent of U.S. Marines from the USS Boston, staged a coup d'etat against the legitimate Hawaiian government. The conspirators, calling themselves the Committee of Safety, proclaimed the establishment of a provisional government. Despite the Queen's protests, the American troops' presence effectively prevented her royal guards from protecting the monarchy. Liliuokalani, wishing to avoid bloodshed, yielded her authority under protest, believing that the United States government would eventually restore her to the throne once the facts of the illegal overthrow became known. Her statement reflected her dignity and foresight. She surrendered not to the provisional government, but to the superior force of the United States, trusting in America's sense of justice to right this wrong. President Grover Cleveland did order an investigation, which concluded that the overthrow had been illegal. Cleveland's administration even recommended restoring the Queen to her throne. However, the provisional government refused to relinquish power, and Cleveland was unwilling to use military force to remove them. The opportunity for justice slipped away. In 1895, supporters of the Queen attempted a counter-revolution to restore the monarchy. Though Liliuokalani denied any involvement in the planning, weapons were discovered buried in her garden at Washington Place, her personal residence. The new Republic of Hawaii, now led by Sanford Dole, arrested the Queen and subjected her to a military trial. Found guilty, she was sentenced to 5 years of hard labor, though this was commuted to imprisonment in an upstairs bedroom of Iolani Palace. During her imprisonment, Liliuokalani composed music and worked on her autobiography, Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen. Through her writings, she documented the injustice of the overthrow and appealed to the conscience of the American people. After 8 months, she was released to house arrest at Washington Place and eventually pardoned in late 1896. Her captivity became a powerful symbol of the suppression of Hawaiian sovereignty. The palace room where she was confined now stands as a memorial to her dignity in the face of injustice. Despite her efforts, Hawaii was annexed to the United States in 1898, formalized by the Newlands Resolution passed by Congress. Liliuokalani spent her remaining years advocating for her people, managing what remained of the Crown lands, and continuing her musical compositions. She established the Liliuokalani Trust for Orphaned and Destitute Hawaiian Children, a philanthropic legacy that continues to this day. Until her death in 1917, at age 79, she remained a symbol of Hawaiian sovereignty and resistance to colonial domination. The story of Queen Liliuokalani continues to resonate in modern Hawaii and beyond. Her struggle represents one of the most poignant examples of indigenous resistance to colonialism in the Pacific. The illegal overthrow of her government has led to a Hawaiian sovereignty movement that remains active today. In 1993, the United States Congress passed the Apology Resolution, acknowledging the overthrow as illegal and offering a formal apology to Native Hawaiians for the U.S. role in ending their independence. Liliuokalani's musical legacy lives on through her compositions, particularly Aloha O'i, which captures the heartbreak of the separation and has become symbolic of Hawaiian cultural identity. Her royal residence, Washington Place, is now a museum honoring her life and legacy. The Queen, who once ruled Hawaii, continues to inspire those who advocate for indigenous rights and self-determination worldwide. Her story reminds us that power is measured not only in victory, but in dignity and resilience, even in defeat. In the quiet evening hours, as the tropical breeze whispers through the palms of Honolulu, one might imagine the Queen at her desk, writing words of resistance or composing melodies of remembrance. Queen Liliuokalani's legacy transcends her loss of power. In her unwavering dignity, her artistic contributions, and her deep aloha for her people, she achieved a kind of sovereignty that no foreign power could ever annex. Her story endures, a reminder of what was lost and what might yet be reclaimed. Empress Dowager Suiko of Japan. In the early dawn of Japanese imperial history, when the islands were just beginning to form their unique identity between Chinese influence and native traditions, arose a remarkable woman who would forever change the course of Japan. Empress Suiko, born in 534 CE as Princess Mikakashia, emerged during a critical transitional period in Japanese history. The daughter of Emperor Kime and the younger sister of Emperor Yomei, her path to power was neither straightforward nor expected. Yet, in the year 592, she ascended to become Japan's first recorded Empress Regnant, ruling not as a regent, but as sovereign in her own right. Her rise to power came at a tumultuous time. The Soga clan had gained significant influence at court, and following the assassination of Emperor Sushin, Suiko's nephew, the powerful Soga no Umako sought a malleable figure to place on the throne. Initially, he approached Prince Shotoku, who declined, and instead suggested his aunt, the widowed Princess Mikakashia. At 39 years old, she became Empress Suiko, inaugurating a reign that would last 35 years and establish a foundation for Japan's classical age. It was a bold political move in a society dominated by male leadership. The success of Empress Suiko's reign cannot be discussed without acknowledging her extraordinary partnership with her nephew, Prince Shotoku Taishi. Appointed as regent and crown prince, Shotoku became the architect of many reforms, while Suiko provided the imperial authority necessary for their implementation. Their collaboration represented one of history's most effective political partnerships. Shotoku, educated in Confucian classics and Buddhist texts, brought intellectual vision, while Suiko contributed pragmatic leadership and the weight of imperial legitimacy. Together, they navigated Japan through a critical period of cultural transformation. Perhaps the most significant contribution of their joint rule was the promulgation of the 17-article Constitution in 604 CE. Though not a constitution in the modern sense, this document outlined the moral and political principles that would guide Japanese governance for centuries. It blended Confucian ethics, Buddhist morality, and native Japanese concepts into a coherent philosophy of state. The Constitution emphasized harmony and consensus, stating, "Harmony is to be valued, and opposition for opposition's sake was to be avoided." This principle of Boe, harmony, remains central to Japanese social and political thought to this day. Under Suiko's reign, Buddhism flourished from an imported foreign faith to a central element of Japanese culture. She issued edicts promoting Buddhist practice and sponsored the construction of numerous temples and monasteries. Most notably, she oversaw the construction of Horyuji in Nara Prefecture, parts of which survive today as some of the world's oldest wooden structures. These temples became centers not just of spiritual practice, but of learning, artistic development, and cultural refinement. The distinctive Japanese Buddhist aesthetic, with its emphasis on natural materials, subtle asymmetry, and refined simplicity, began to emerge during her reign. Diplomatic relations with China formed another cornerstone of Suiko's accomplishments. She dispatched several embassies to the Sui dynasty court, significantly in 607, when she sent an official delegation led by Ono no Imoko, carrying a letter addressing the Chinese emperor as an equal. The famous opening line, "From the sovereign of the land of the rising sun to the sovereign of the land of the setting sun," asserted Japan's independent identity while acknowledging cultural debt to China. These missions facilitated not just political relations, but the transmission of continental knowledge, technology, calendar systems, and administrative practices. The cultural flowering during Suiko's reign transformed Japan. Court procedures became more elaborate, incorporating Chinese ceremonial elements while maintaining distinctly Japanese characteristics. The introduction of Chinese writing led to the development of a Japanese writing system. Literature began to flourish. Architecture adopted continental techniques while adapting to Japanese environmental conditions and aesthetic preferences. Buddhist sculpture, heavily influenced by Korean and Chinese models, began developing uniquely Japanese characteristics, more rounded features, serene expressions, and graceful postures that would define Japanese Buddhist art. Beyond her political and cultural accomplishments, Suiko's reign established an important precedent for female leadership in Japan. Following her example, Japan would see several other empresses ascend the chrysanthemum throne, including Empresses Kokioku, Saimei, Jito, and Gensho. While male succession eventually became the norm, the early acceptance of female rulers distinguished Japan from mainland Asia in its flexibility regarding gender and leadership. Suiko demonstrated that a woman could effectively wield imperial authority, setting a pattern that allowed Japan to draw upon the talents of both men and women in times of political necessity. When Empress Suiko died in 628 CE at the age of 75, she left behind a transformed Japan. The country had moved decisively toward a centralized state modeled partially on Chinese examples, but maintaining its distinct identity. Buddhism had taken root alongside native Shinto practices, creating the syncretic religious landscape that would characterize Japanese spirituality. Writing, architecture, art, and governmental structures had all developed in ways that would define Japanese civilization for centuries to come. In many ways, foundations of classical Japanese culture were laid during her extraordinary reign. Suiko's legacy extends far beyond her lifetime. The Asuka period over which she presided represents the emergence of Japan as a unified state with a coherent cultural identity. The imperial institution she strengthened continues as the world's oldest hereditary monarchy. The Buddhist temples she patronized remain as treasures of world heritage. Most importantly, she demonstrated that effective leadership transcends gender, establishing a model of female sovereignty that would influence Japanese history for generations. Empress Suiko stands as a testament to how a skilled leader can guide a society through profound cultural transformation while preserving its essential character. Queen Christina of Sweden. In the winter of 1626, as snow blanketed the Swedish countryside, a child was born who would defy every expectation placed upon her. Queen Christina of Sweden entered the world as the only surviving legitimate heir of Gustav II Adolf, the mighty Lion of the North. Her father, disappointed at not having a son, nevertheless declared that his daughter should be raised as a prince. This unusual upbringing would shape Christina into one of history's most fascinating monarchs. A woman who valued intellectual freedom above royal duty, who rejected marriage for independence, and who ultimately abandoned her throne to pursue a life of philosophical inquiry. Far from the northern kingdom she was born to rule. The education of a queen. Christina's education was unprecedented for a female royal of the 17th century. Following her father's death at the Battle of Lutzen, when she was just 6 years old, her unique upbringing intensified. The young queen studied for 10 hours daily, mastering languages including Latin, Greek, French, and German. She trained in riding, fencing, and other traditionally masculine pursuits, developing both physical resilience and intellectual breadth that astounded foreign visitors. Her tutors, following Gustav's instructions, educated her exactly as they would have a male heir, exposing her to philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and politics. By adolescence, Christina had developed an insatiable intellectual curiosity that would define her reign and her destiny. The reluctant ruler, when Christina formally assumed power at age 18 in 1644, she brought a brilliant mind to Sweden's throne during the tumultuous 30 Years' War. She quickly demonstrated remarkable diplomatic skill, playing a crucial role in the negotiations that led to the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, ending decades of religious bloodshed across Europe. Despite this early success, Christina found court life stifling. She scandalized her advisors by rejecting suitor after suitor, declaring her intention never to marry. The queen, dressed in masculine attire, spoke in a deep voice, and behaved with a freedom typically reserved for men. Her unconventional behavior fueled endless speculation about her identity and sexuality. Debates that continue among historians today. A court of intellect. Christina transformed Stockholm into a northern Athens, creating a brilliant intellectual court that attracted Europe's greatest minds. In 1649, she invited the celebrated philosopher René Descartes to Sweden, eager to study mathematics and philosophy under his guidance. The queen arranged dawn meetings with the philosopher, forcing the aging Frenchman to brave the bitter Swedish winter mornings for their intellectual exchanges. Many historians believe these harsh conditions contributed to Descartes' death from pneumonia just months after his arrival, a tragic consequence of Christina's relentless intellectual pursuits. Yet her patronage extended far beyond Descartes, as she collected rare manuscripts, assembled one of Europe's finest libraries, and corresponded with scholars across the continent. The spiritual journey. As Christina approached her late 20s, a profound spiritual and intellectual crisis took hold. Despite Sweden's strict Lutheran orthodoxy, the queen began secretly studying Catholicism, finding herself drawn to its rituals, history, and philosophical traditions. Her religious explorations coincided with growing political tensions. Swedish nobles grew increasingly concerned about her refusal to marry and provide an heir, her lavish spending on arts and culture, and her disinterest in the day-to-day governance of her kingdom. Christina made a decision that would shock all of Europe. She would abdicate her throne, convert to Catholicism, and seek a life of intellectual freedom beyond Sweden's borders. The abdication. On June 6, 1654, in an elaborate ceremony at Uppsala Castle, Queen Christina removed her crown, royal mantle, and scepter, placing them aside to become simply Christina Alexandra. At just 28 years old, she surrendered one of Europe's most powerful thrones to her cousin Charles VI Gustav. Immediately afterward, she departed Sweden, never to return. Traveling across Europe in men's clothing, she made her way to Rome, where she publicly converted to Catholicism in a triumphant ceremony at Innsbruck. Pope Alexander VII welcomed the royal convert, and Christina established herself in the Eternal City, where she would spend most of her remaining life pursuing the intellectual and cultural freedom she had so desperately craved. A Roman Renaissance. In Rome, Christina created the brilliant intellectual salon she had always envisioned. The Riario Palace became her home and the center of the Accademia dell'Arcadia, where philosophers, scientists, musicians, and artists gathered under her patronage. She assembled a magnificent collection of art and manuscripts, including works by Raphael, Titian, and rare Greek and Roman texts. Her palace became a haven for free thinking and artistic innovation. Christina funded scientific experiments, theatrical productions, and musical performances, becoming one of Rome's most important cultural figures. Though her outspoken nature and unconventional behavior occasionally scandalized papal society, her status as a royal convert to Catholicism ensured her position remained secure. The legacy of a free spirit. Christina died in Rome on April 19, 1689, at the age of 62, and received the rare honor for a woman of burial in St. Peter's Basilica. Her legacy defies simple categorization. To some, she remains a symbol of feminist independence, a woman who refused to be constrained by gender expectations. To others, she represents the intellectual curiosity of the emerging scientific age. Her conversion journey inspires religious scholars, while her patronage of the arts established collections that enrich museums to this day. Perhaps most remarkably, Christina chose personal freedom over power, a queen who valued the life of the mind above the rule of a kingdom, and who dared to create her own unconventional path through history. Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor of Aquitaine stands as perhaps the most extraordinary woman of the Middle Ages, a figure whose life spanned nearly the entire 12th century and whose influence shaped two great kingdoms. Born around 1122 to William X, Duke of Aquitaine, Eleanor inherited at 15 one of the largest and richest provinces in France, a vast territory stretching from the Loire Valley to the Pyrenees. Not merely wealthy, Aquitaine was a land of troubadours and courtly love, of sophisticated culture amid the otherwise martial medieval world. Eleanor grew up educated, spirited, and independent in a court that valued artistic expression as much as political power. When her father died unexpectedly while on pilgrimage in 1137, Eleanor became the most desirable bride in Europe. Within months, she was married to Louis VII of France, transforming her overnight from a duchess to a queen. The young queen brought to the austere Parisian court the vivacity and cultural richness of Aquitaine, shocking the more conservative northern nobles with her fashionable clothing, her outspoken manner, and her encouragement of music and poetry. For Louis, a pious, serious man who had originally been destined for the church, his beautiful, vivacious wife proved both fascinating and troubling. Their marriage produced only two daughters, not the male heir France desperately needed. The strain between the royal couple grew during the Second Crusade of 1147, which Eleanor joined alongside her husband. This extraordinary expedition saw Eleanor traveling thousands of miles to the Holy Land, accompanied by ladies dressed as Amazons. In Antioch, her close relationship with her uncle Raymond, Prince of Antioch, caused widespread scandal and deepened the rift with Louis. By the time they returned to France in 1149, their marriage was effectively over, though it would take several more years to secure an annulment on grounds of consanguinity. Eleanor's story might have ended there, a footnote as a failed French queen, but instead she orchestrated one of history's most remarkable second acts. Within weeks of her annulment in 1152, the 30-year-old Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy, a man 9 years her junior who was already amassing territories and power. When Henry became King of England 2 years later, Eleanor found herself queen once again, this time of a realm across the Channel from her first kingdom. Their union created a vast Angevin empire that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees. With Henry, Eleanor would bear 8 children, including 5 sons who survived to adulthood, finally producing the male heirs she had been unable to give Louis. The early years of their marriage were consumed with administrative duties, as Eleanor often governed England during Henry's frequent absences on the continent. She established her own court in Poitiers during the 1170s, where she presided over famous courts of love that became centers of chivalric culture, troubadour poetry, and the codification of courtly love traditions that would influence European literature for centuries to come. Yet the political story of Eleanor's life took a dramatic turn in 1173, when she supported her sons in rebellion against their father. Henry's infidelities and his efforts to control the inheritance of their sons had driven Eleanor to a breaking point. When the rebellion failed, Henry's punishment was severe. He imprisoned Eleanor for nearly 16 years, an extraordinary confinement for a queen. In castles across England, Eleanor remained captive until Henry's death in 1189 freed her at the age of 67. Most women of her era would have retreated to a quiet retirement, but Eleanor was hardly typical. Her son, Richard the Lionheart's ascension to the throne marked yet another chapter in Eleanor's remarkable life. When Richard departed on the Third Crusade, Eleanor ruled England as regent. Even more remarkably, when Richard was captured and held for ransom on his return journey, the elderly queen personally traveled across the Alps in winter to deliver the enormous ransom to Germany. After Richard's death, she supported her youngest son, John, though his reign would prove disastrous for the Angevin dynasty. Eleanor's final political act was to secure her granddaughter, Blanche of Castile, as bride for the French king's son. When Eleanor died in 1204, at the astonishing age of 82, she had outlived all but 2 of her children and had shaped the politics of Europe for over 6 decades. She had been Duchess, Queen of 2 countries, crusader, prisoner, regent, and diplomat. The troubadours she patronized ensured her memory lived on in literature and song. Eleanor's bloodline would flow through the royal houses of Europe for centuries. Her life bridged the chasm between the early and high Middle Ages, between the First Crusade and the signing of Magna Carta, between the world of feudal knights and the emerging era of courtly love and chivalry. Boudica of the Seine, in the misty lands of ancient Britain during the 1st century CE, rose one of history's most formidable warrior queens. Boudica, whose name would come to symbolize resistance against oppression, ruled the Iceni tribe alongside her husband, King Prasutagus. The Iceni inhabited the area now known as Norfolk and Suffolk in eastern England, living in relative peace as a client kingdom of Rome. Boudica herself was born into nobility around 30 CE, raised in Celtic traditions that, unlike Roman customs, allowed women to inherit property, lead tribes, and even command armies. Little is known of Boudica's early life, though historians believe she received education befitting her noble status, learning tribal history, religious practices, and possibly military tactics. The Celts were a sophisticated people with their own currency, skilled metalwork, and complex social structures. As a high-born woman, Boudica likely had distinctive appearance, tall with flowing red hair, adorned with a torque, a twisted metal necklace symbolizing nobility. Her marriage to Prasutagus united important tribal factions, strengthening the Iceni position while maintaining cautious alliance with Roman authorities. The delicate balance between Iceni independence and Roman subjugation continued for years. Prasutagus, understanding Roman power, made accommodations to preserve his people's relative autonomy. Meanwhile, Roman presence in Britain steadily expanded following Claudius's invasion in 43 CE. The occupiers established towns, built roads, and extracted heavy taxes from the native populations. Beneath this uneasy coexistence simmered growing resentment among the Britons, who viewed Roman rule as increasingly oppressive and disrespectful of their ancestral ways. The catalyst for rebellion came in 60 CE with the death of King Prasutagus. Attempting to protect his family and tribe, Prasutagus named Emperor Nero as co-heir alongside his two daughters in his will, hoping this would secure peaceful succession and continued autonomy. This careful strategy represented traditional Celtic pragmatism in dealing with overwhelming force. However, the Romans recognized no such arrangement. Instead of honoring the king's wishes, they saw opportunity to absorb the Iceni territory fully into the province of Britannia. What followed was unconscionable. Roman officials seized Iceni lands, treating the entire kingdom as conquered territory. Roman soldiers plundered the homes of tribal nobles. When Boudica protested this violation of her husband's will, Roman authorities responded with brutal force. In full view of her people, Boudica was publicly flogged, a humiliation intended to demonstrate Roman dominance. Even more horrifically, her young daughters were sexually assaulted by Roman soldiers. These atrocities, far from subduing the Iceni, ignited a fury that would soon engulf Roman Britain. Boudica transformed personal tragedy into righteous rebellion. Her suffering resonated with neighboring tribes who had experienced similar Roman cruelties. She emerged as a charismatic leader, marshaling not only her own Iceni, but forging alliances with the neighboring Trinovantes and other tribes. Contemporary Roman historians describe her addressing assembled warriors before battle, invoking their gods, emphasizing Roman cruelty, and declaring that victory or honorable death were the only acceptable outcomes. As she spoke, a hare, sacred animal associated with divination, reportedly ran from her robes, interpreted as divine approval. The rebellion began in spectacular fashion. Boudica's first target was Camulodunum, modern Colchester, the former Trinovantian capital, converted to a colony for retired Roman soldiers. The settlement symbolized Roman usurpation of native lands, housing a temple to the former Emperor Claudius, where Britons were forced to worship and fund with their taxes. In 60 or 61 CE, Boudica's coalition descended upon the town with overwhelming force. Roman veterans and settlers had little warning and insufficient defenses. The colonists requested urgent reinforcements from the provincial governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus. Help would arrive too late. The 9th Legion, dispatched to save Camulodunum, was intercepted and defeated by Boudica's forces, losing as many as 2,000 infantry. The rebels then methodically destroyed the colony, burning buildings and slaughtering inhabitants. Archaeological evidence confirms this devastation, a layer of reddish-orange burned debris approximately half a meter thick, dating precisely to this period. Boudica's forces spared no one in their righteous vengeance, leaving behind a city reduced to ash and rubble. With momentum building, Boudica turned her attention westward to Londinium, modern London. Though smaller than modern London, it was already an important commercial center. Suetonius Paulinus briefly considered defending the settlement, but recognizing the rebels' superior numbers, evacuated those willing to flee and abandoned the town. Those remaining faced the same fate as Camulodunum's inhabitants. Boudica's forces burned Londinium entirely, again leaving archaeological evidence in a distinctive Boudican destruction layer of charred debris. Roman historians claim 70,000 people were killed across these settlements. the rebels continued their campaign of destruction, moving next to Verulamium, modern St. Albans. This target held special significance as a municipium, a town whose British inhabitants had adopted Roman ways and been granted certain privileges. To Boudica and her followers, these people represented the worst kind of betrayal, natives who had abandoned their heritage to embrace Roman customs. The town met the same fiery end as Camulodunum and Londinium. In mere weeks, Boudica had obliterated the three largest Roman settlements in Britain. Suetonius Paulinus, gathering his forces, prepared for decisive confrontation. The Roman governor was a capable military commander who had been campaigning in Wales when the rebellion began. He assembled approximately 10,000 men, primarily from the 14th and 20th legions, along with auxiliaries. Though still outnumbered, Roman discipline, training, and equipment gave them advantages over the Britons' greater numbers. Suetonius selected his battlefield carefully, a narrow valley with forest protecting his flanks, forcing the British to attack along a constricted front where their numbers provided less advantage. The final battle, thought to have occurred somewhere in the English Midlands, would determine Britain's immediate future. Boudica arrived with an enormous force, perhaps 100,000 Tlandes, including warriors, camp followers, and families who traveled in wagons to witness Rome's defeat. The Celtic queen rode in a chariot, her daughters beside her, rallying her forces with passionate speeches about liberty and vengeance. The Britons, confident in their overwhelming numbers and righteous cause, expected victory. They positioned their wagons in a crescent behind the battlefield to watch the anticipated triumph. What followed was catastrophe for the British tribes. The disciplined Roman formation held against repeated charges. When the Britons tired, Roman forces advanced in wedge formation, methodically killing all who opposed them. When British warriors tried retreating, they found themselves trapped by their own supply wagons. It began as a battle, became a massacre. Roman sources claim 80,000 Britons were killed against only 400 Roman casualties. Numbers certainly exaggerated, but indicating a decisive Roman victory. Boudica's fate remains contested. Some accounts suggest she took poison to avoid capture. Others claim she escaped, fell ill, and died. The archaeological record confirms the rebellion's destruction. Beyond the burned layers in Colchester, London, and St. Albans, excavations have revealed hastily buried hoards of valuables never reclaimed by their owners, suggesting widespread death. After crushing the rebellion, Rome increased its military presence in Britain and imposed punitive measures on native tribes. The province remained firmly under Roman control for another 3 centuries. Despite defeat, Boudica's legacy endured. During the Victorian era, she was rediscovered as a British national hero, symbolized by the famous bronze statue near Westminster Bridge in London. Boudica reminds us that resistance to oppression transcends time. Though ultimately unsuccessful in driving out the Romans, her rebellion demonstrated extraordinary leadership and the power of righteous anger against injustice. From a flogged widow to the commander of the largest force ever assembled against Roman Britain, her transformation exemplifies how personal tragedy can ignite wider movements for freedom. While Rome recorded her as a savage barbarian, history now recognizes Boudica as she truly was, a queen defending her people's sovereignty and dignity against imperial aggression, earning her place among history's most remarkable women warriors. Empress Matilda of England. In the turbulent years of 12th century England, one woman stands above all others in her determined quest for the crown that was rightfully hers. Empress Matilda, daughter of King Henry I, granddaughter of William the Conqueror, became the center of a bloody civil war that tore England apart for nearly 2 decades. Her story is one of ambition, betrayal, resilience, and ultimately a different kind of triumph than she had initially sought. A woman born into royal privilege who faced challenges that would have broken lesser souls. Matilda's journey to the center of English politics began far from English shores. Born in 1102 to King Henry I and his Norman Scottish queen, Matilda of Scotland, the young princess found herself thrust onto the international stage at just 8 years old. Henry, ever the shrewd diplomat, arranged her marriage to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry V, a man in his 20s. The child bride was sent to Germany, where she would be raised and educated in the imperial court, learning the intricate dance of medieval politics that would serve her well in later years. For a decade, Matilda served as Empress Consort, absorbing the lessons of power at the highest levels of European governance. She grew into a formidable woman, highly educated, confident, and with a keen understanding of the responsibilities of rule. When her husband died in 1125, the 23-year-old Dowager Empress returned to her father's court with an enhanced status and intimate knowledge of imperial administration. King Henry, who had lost his only legitimate son in the tragic White Ship disaster of 1120, now looked to Matilda as his heir. In a bold and unprecedented move for Norman England, Henry III gathered his barons in 1127 and compelled them to swear allegiance to Matilda as his successor. This extraordinary oath acknowledged a woman as the rightful heir to the English throne, challenging the deeply ingrained misogyny of medieval power structures. To strengthen Matilda's position, Henry arranged her marriage to Geoffrey of Anjou, a strategic alliance aimed at securing England's continental interests. The marriage produced 3 sons, the eldest of whom would eventually fulfill his mother's royal ambitions. When King Henry died in December 1135, Matilda was in Anjou with her husband, pregnant with their 3rd child. The timing proved disastrous. Before she could claim her inheritance, her cousin, Stephen of Blois, grandson of William the Conqueror through his daughter Adela, made a swift crossing to England. With support from his brother, the powerful Bishop of Winchester, Stephen seized the treasury at Winchester and had himself crowned king at Westminster Abbey. The barons who had sworn allegiance to Matilda rapidly switched their loyalty to Stephen. Many English nobles preferred Stephen, finding the idea of a male ruler more palatable than being governed by a woman. Additionally, Matilda's marriage to Geoffrey of Anjou had caused concern, as the Angevins were traditional enemies of the Normans. Stephen initially secured his position with promises of good governance and religious liberties. However, his reign soon demonstrated critical weaknesses. He was too lenient with rebellious barons and made powerful enemies through political miscalculations and broken promises. Matilda refused to accept this usurpation of her rightful position. In 1139, she crossed to England with her half-brother Robert of Gloucester, launching what would become known as the Anarchy, nearly 2 decades of civil war that devastated the country. Castle by castle, region by region, England descended into chaos as loyalty shifted between the rivals. Matilda demonstrated remarkable military and political skills, gradually building support among disaffected nobles and exploiting Stephen's mistakes. The tide turned decisively in February 1141 at the Battle of Lincoln, where Stephen was captured by Matilda's forces. Briefly, victory seemed assured for the Empress. She moved to London for her coronation, adopting the title Lady of the English. However, her haughty demeanor alienated potential supporters, including the citizens of London, who drove her from the city before she could be crowned. Soon after, Stephen's queen raised new forces, capturing Robert of Gloucester and forcing an exchange of prisoners. The war returned to its bloody stalemate. Perhaps Matilda's most dramatic moment came at Oxford in December 1142. Besieged by Stephen's army in the dead of winter, she orchestrated a daring escape. Under cover of darkness, dressed in white to blend with the snow, Matilda and a small group of knights slipped past enemy lines, crossed the frozen Thames, and made a grueling journey on foot to the safety of Wallingford Castle. This remarkable feat demonstrated her courage and determination, qualities that inspired continued loyalty among her supporters. As years of conflict dragged on, England suffered terribly. Contemporary chroniclers described a land where Christ and his saints slept, where lawlessness prevailed and ordinary people endured terrible hardships. Neither side could achieve decisive victory. Gradually, the focus of the conflict shifted to the next generation. Matilda's eldest son, Henry Plantagenet, grew into a capable military leader with a strong claim to the throne. By 1153, he had won sufficient support to force Stephen to negotiate. The Treaty of Winchester finally ended the Civil War, with Stephen recognizing Henry as his heir, bypassing his own son Eustace. When Stephen died in 1154, Henry II ascended the throne peacefully, becoming the first of the Plantagenet dynasty that would rule England for centuries. Though Matilda had not won the crown for herself, she had secured it for her son, a different kind of victory, but a significant one. Through her son, her bloodline would rule England far longer than any direct reign she might have had. In her later years, Matilda returned to Normandy, where she effectively governed as Henry's representative. She remained an influential advisor to her son, helping to establish the foundations of the vast Angevin Empire that would dominate Western Europe. From her court at Rouen, she continued to demonstrate the political acumen that had characterized her remarkable life, mediating disputes and providing wise counsel based on her extensive experience. She died in 1167, respected and powerful to the end. Empress Matilda never wore the crown of England, yet her impact on English history proved profound. She shattered precedents about female rule, laying groundwork for future queens regnant like Elizabeth the First and Victoria. The Civil War she fought, though devastating, established important principles about legitimate succession that would shape English monarchy for generations. Perhaps most significantly, through her son Henry II, she founded a dynasty that would transform English law, governance, and culture. In the medieval chronicles, Matilda is often portrayed harshly, described as proud, stubborn, and unwomanly in her ambition. Yet, viewed through a modern lens, we can recognize these as the necessary qualities of a woman determined to claim what was rightfully hers in a world designed to exclude her from power. The empress who fought a civil war for her crown demonstrated extraordinary courage, intelligence, and perseverance against overwhelming odds. Her legacy lives on in the monarchs who trace their lineage through her to the present day. Indira Gandhi of India. The story of Indira Gandhi begins not in the halls of power, but in the shadow of India's struggle for independence. Born Indira Nehru on November 19, 1917, she entered the world as the only child of Jawaharlal Nehru, who would later become India's first prime minister. Her childhood was not that of a typical Indian girl, but rather one steeped in politics, privilege, and purpose. Her mother, Kamala, was often ill, which thrust young Indira into the role of her father's hostess and confidant from an early age. As Nehru became increasingly involved in the independence movement, Indira watched and learned, absorbing the complexities of politics through osmosis. The Grand Anand Bhavan, the Nehru family home in Allahabad, became a center of political activity, hosting luminaries of the independence movement, including Mahatma Gandhi, after whom she would later take her surname through marriage. Indira's formal education was fragmented, interrupted by her mother's tuberculosis and the family's political activities. She attended schools in India, Switzerland, and Oxford, though she never completed a degree. These international experiences broadened her perspective beyond India's borders, giving her a worldview that would later inform her leadership. The imprisonment of her father and other family members during the freedom struggle left an indelible mark on her psyche. In 1942, Indira married Feroz Gandhi, a fellow independence activist with no relation to Mahatma Gandhi. Their union produced two sons, Rajiv and Sanjay, but the marriage was troubled as her father became Prime Minister of independent India in 1947. Indira chose to support him rather than her marriage, moving into his official residence to serve as his hostess and informal advisor. These years provided her with an unparalleled political apprenticeship as she observed firsthand the workings of government and diplomacy. Though she held no official position, she was absorbing lessons in statecraft that would serve her well in the decades to come. After her father's death in 1964, Indira initially served as Information and Broadcasting Minister under Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri. When Shastri died suddenly in 1966, the Congress Party's old guard selected Indira as Prime Minister, believing they could control this seemingly shy, unassuming woman. They soon discovered their grave miscalculation. Indira quickly proved herself to be a formidable political operator with a will of iron. She outmaneuvered her opponents within the party, eventually splitting the Congress Party and emerging as the leader of the more progressive faction. The 1971 election, which she won with the powerful slogan, "Garibi Hatao," remove poverty, cemented her position. The defining moment of Indira's first period as Prime Minister came with the Bangladesh Liberation War of 1971. When Pakistan's military crackdown in East Pakistan sent millions of refugees fleeing into India, she acted decisively. Despite international pressure, particularly from the United States, she supported the Bengali independence movement and ultimately sent Indian troops into East Pakistan. The swift Indian victory led to the creation of Bangladesh and established India as the dominant power in South Asia. This bold action showcased Indira's willingness to defy global superpowers and act according to India's interests as she perceived them. Domestically, Indira pursued socialist policies, nationalizing banks and abolishing the privy purses of India's former princely rulers. Her government focused on agricultural innovation through the Green Revolution, which increased food production and moved India towards self-sufficiency. However, economic challenges, including inflation and unemployment, persisted. By 1975, Indira faced mounting opposition and a court ruling invalidating her 1971 election. Rather than resign, she made the most controversial decision of her career, declaring a state of emergency, suspending civil liberties, and imprisoning political opponents. India experienced 21 months of authoritarian rule. The emergency revealed a darker side of Indira's leadership. Press censorship silenced criticism, while her younger son Sanjay implemented a draconian forced sterilization program. Constitutional amendments were pushed through to strengthen her position. Yet, in 1977, believing herself still popular, she called elections. The Indian electorate delivered a stunning rebuke, voting her out of office. This period in the political wilderness proved brief, however. The coalition that replaced her quickly unraveled, and in 1980, Indira Gandhi triumphantly returned as Prime Minister, demonstrating her remarkable political resilience and the enduring appeal she held for many Indians. Personal tragedy struck in 1980 when Sanjay, her chosen political heir, died in a plane crash. Indira turned to her reluctant elder son Rajiv, persuading him to enter politics. Meanwhile, she faced growing separatist movements, particularly in Punjab, where Sikh militants demanded greater autonomy. Her decision to send troops into the Golden Temple, Sikhism's holiest shrine, to flush out armed separatists proved fateful. On October 31st, 1984, Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her own Sikh bodyguards in an act of vengeance, bringing her remarkable life to a violent end at age 66. Widespread anti-Sikh riots followed. Indira Gandhi's legacy remains deeply complex and contested. To supporters, she embodied the strength and sovereignty of India, standing tall against international pressure while working to uplift the poor. They remember her as Mother India, a leader who modernized the nation and secured its place on the world stage. To critics, she represents an authoritarian turn in Indian democracy, willing to subvert institutions for personal power. Her dynasty continues through her grandson Rahul, who leads the Congress Party today. What remains undeniable is her towering influence on Indian politics, the woman who transformed herself from a shy political daughter into one of the most powerful leaders of the 20th century. Queen Tamar of Georgia, in the misty mountains of the Caucasus, where rivers carve deep valleys and ancient fortresses crown rugged peaks, rose one of history's most remarkable rulers, Queen Tamar of Georgia, who reigned from 1184 to 1213, transformed a modest kingdom into a powerful empire during what historians call the Georgian Golden Age. Born into the Bagrationi dynasty around 1160, Tamar's destiny was unusual from the start. Unlike most royal daughters of her time, she was not merely prepared for a strategic marriage, but was instead groomed for rulership by her father, King George III. When Tamar was just 18, her forward-thinking father took an unprecedented step. Recognizing her exceptional abilities, he named her co-ruler in 1178, ensuring a smooth succession and protecting Georgia from the chaos that often followed a monarch's death. For 6 years, father and daughter ruled together, with the young princess learning the intricacies of governance, diplomacy, and military strategy at her father's side. This apprenticeship proved invaluable, as Georgia was surrounded by powerful Muslim states and required constant vigilance to maintain its independence and Orthodox Christian identity. Upon King George's death in 1184, Tamar became sole ruler of Georgia. Immediately, she faced resistance from nobles who refused to accept a woman's authority. The male aristocracy, accustomed to traditional gender roles, attempted to control the young queen by forcing her into marriage with the Russian prince Yuri Bogolyubsky. This political marriage quickly proved disastrous. Yuri's violent behavior, drunkenness, and alleged perverse practices, as Georgian chronicles delicately suggest, made the union untenable. In an extraordinary assertion of her authority, Tamar divorced Yuri and expelled him from Georgia, an almost unheard of action for a medieval queen. This bold move established the pattern of Tamar's reign. Rather than allowing herself to be constrained by gender expectations, she seized full control of her kingdom. Her second marriage to David Soslin, a prince of the Ossetian royal house, proved far more successful. David respected Tamar's authority and served as her loyal military commander, while she maintained her position as the sovereign ruler. Together, they produced 2 children who would continue the Bagrationi dynasty, George and Rusdan, both future monarchs of Georgia. Under Tamar's leadership, Georgia's military power reached unprecedented heights. Her armies marched victoriously across the Caucasus, defeating the Seljuk Turks and other Muslim powers who had long threatened Georgian territories. The kingdom expanded southward to include parts of modern-day Turkey, eastward into Azerbaijan, and northward into the mountains of Dagestan. Perhaps most impressively, in 1204, Georgian forces captured the heavily fortified city of Kars and marched triumphantly into northern Persia, reaching as far as Tabriz and Ardabil. What distinguished Tamar's military campaigns was not just conquest, but strategic vision. She established Georgian authority over crucial trade routes connecting east and west, bringing unprecedented wealth into her kingdom. Rather than ruling captured territories with an iron fist, she often installed local rulers who pledged loyalty to Georgia, creating a network of client states that formed a buffer zone around her kingdom. This pragmatic approach allowed her to extend Georgian influence without overextending her resources. Remarkably, Tamar achieved these military successes while maintaining her commitment to Orthodox Christianity. Medieval chronicles refer to her as the most holy queen who built churches, endowed monasteries, and supported religious scholars. Yet, she practiced a pragmatic tolerance unusual for her era. While firmly orthodox herself, she protected Georgian Jews from persecution and maintained diplomatic relations with Muslim neighbors. In conquered territories, she typically allowed local people to maintain their religious practices, asking only for political loyalty and tribute. This religious tolerance extended to Tamar's court, where Muslim scholars and merchants were welcome alongside Christian nobles. Contemporary accounts describe how she would listen to debates between Islamic and Christian theologians, showing respect for intellectual discourse across religious divides. Such openness was extraordinarily rare in medieval Europe, where religious differences typically led to violent conflict. Tamar understood that Georgia's position at the crossroads of civilizations required a more nuanced approach to religious diversity. Perhaps most fascinating is Tamar's unique royal title. Official documents referred to her not as queen, but as King of Kings and Queen of Queens. This deliberate linguistic choice emphasized that she ruled in her own right, not as a consort or regent. Georgian chronicles describe her as Mepe, king, the masculine form of the title, highlighting her sovereign authority. The dual nature of her title reflected the unprecedented nature of her rule, a woman exercising power traditionally reserved for men, yet doing so with such skill that even her male nobles eventually accepted her authority. The prosperity brought by military success and trade enabled a remarkable cultural flowering during Tamar's reign. Literature flourished, producing Georgia's national epic poem, The Knight in the Panther's Skin, by Shota Rustaveli. This masterpiece, dedicated to Tamar, portrayed strong female characters and advocated for women's equality, revolutionary concepts for the medieval world. Architecture reached new heights of sophistication, with monasteries and churches like Galati and Varzia showcasing distinctive Georgian styles that blended Eastern and Western influences. Varzia, particularly, exemplifies Tamar's vision. Carved into a mountainside, this massive cave monastery complex contained a church, royal apartments, and housing for hundreds of monks. Strategic as well as spiritual, it served as a fortress protecting Georgia's southern frontier. Its walls were adorned with magnificent frescoes, including a famous portrait of Tamar herself, depicted not as a demure queen, but as a regal figure dressed in royal regalia, identical to that worn by male monarchs. Queen Tamar died in 1213, after nearly 3 decades of rule that transformed Georgia from a minor kingdom into a regional power. The state she built continued to prosper under her son George IV and daughter Rusudan, though it would eventually fall to the Mongol invasions later in the century. Yet her legacy endured in Georgian cultural memory. For centuries, Georgians have named their daughters Tamar in her honor. Icons depict her as a saint, though she was never officially canonized. Folklore attributes miracles to her reign, claiming that during her rule, wolves and lambs drank water side by side. In modern Georgia, Tamar remains a powerful national symbol. Her face appears on currency, streets bear her name, and her story is taught to every school child. When Georgians speak of their golden age, they speak of Tamar's reign, a time when their small nation stood proudly independent, culturally vibrant, and politically influential. For a country that has endured centuries of invasion and domination by larger powers, Queen Tamar represents the possibility of Georgian greatness against all odds. Today, historians recognize Queen Tamar as one of history's most successful female monarchs. In a world where women rarely held power in their own right, she not only ruled but expanded her kingdom, fostered cultural achievement, and navigated complex religious and diplomatic challenges with remarkable skill. While contemporaries like Eleanor of Aquitaine struggled against patriarchal constraints, Tamar managed to transcend them entirely, ruling not as a woman who happened to be queen, but as a sovereign whose gender became secondary to her authority as King of Kings. Zenobia of Palmyra. In the sun-drenched Syrian desert of the 3rd century, an extraordinary woman rose to power whose ambition and intelligence rivaled that of any emperor. Zenobia of Palmyra, born around 240 CE, emerged as one of Rome's most formidable adversaries during a period of imperial crisis. Known to her people as Batsabai, Zenobia's early life prepared her uniquely for leadership. Growing up in the prosperous caravan city of Palmyra, a crucial trading hub connecting the silks of China and spices of India with the hungry markets of Rome, she received an education remarkable for women of her era. Zenobia was no ordinary noblewoman. Raised in a cosmopolitan environment, she mastered multiple languages, including her native Aramaic, Greek, Egyptian, and possibly Latin. This linguistic prowess later proved invaluable in diplomatic relations with the diverse peoples of her expanding empire. Beyond intellectual pursuits, Zenobia developed extraordinary physical prowess. Historical accounts describe her hunting lions and bears in the desert, riding horseback for tremendous distances, and marching on foot alongside her soldiers, abilities that earned her the respect of Palmyra's military. Her marriage to Septimius Odaenathus, Palmyra's ruler, initially kept her in a traditional royal consort role. Odaenathus had established himself as Rome's loyal ally, defending the empire's eastern frontier against Persian aggression. For his service, Rome granted him the impressive title of Corrector of the East, essentially making him the empire's most powerful eastern representative. Zenobia observed carefully during these years, absorbing lessons in governance, military strategy, and the complex power dynamics between Rome and its eastern provinces. The year 267 CE marked the turning point in Zenobia's life. When assassins murdered Odaenathus and his son from a previous marriage, Zenobia seized her opportunity. Rather than surrendering power to Rome, she declared herself regent for her young son Babalathus and took control of Palmyra. What happened next astonished the ancient world. Instead of maintaining Palmyra's status as a Roman client state, Zenobia embarked on an ambitious campaign of conquest that would challenge Rome's dominance in the east. With strategic brilliance, Zenobia recognized Rome's vulnerability. The empire had entered what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, a period of rapid emperor turnover, civil wars, economic instability, and barbarian incursions. While Rome focused on internal problems and threats along its northern frontiers, its eastern provinces lay exposed. Zenobia's initial expansions into neighboring territories might have been tolerated, but her ambitions grew far beyond what Rome could ignore. By 270 CE, Palmyrene forces under Zenobia's general Zabdas had swept through Syria and invaded Roman Egypt, the empire's richest province and vital grain supplier. The conquest of Egypt represented a masterstroke. Not only did it provide tremendous wealth and resources, but it also gave Zenobia leverage over Rome's food supply. Her empire now stretched from central Turkey to southern Egypt, encompassing much of Rome's eastern territories. Coins from this period show her son the title Augustus, equal to the Roman emperor, while Zenobia herself adopted the title Augusta, empress. Zenobia's governance proved as impressive as her conquests. She maintained the administrative systems that had made these territories prosperous while installing loyal officials. In Egypt, she presented herself as a new Cleopatra, respecting local traditions while firmly establishing control. Her court in Palmyra became a center of culture and learning, attracting philosophers and artists. Among them was the Neoplatonist philosopher Cassius Longinus, who likely advised her on matters of Hellenistic kingship and imperial ideology. Religious tolerance characterized her rule, though possibly sympathetic to Judaism and Christianity herself. Zenobia maintained an official policy of religious pluralism that honored the diverse traditions within her realm. This pragmatic approach helped secure the loyalty of newly conquered peoples. The queen understood that sustainable empire building required more than military might. It demanded cultural and religious sensitivity to diverse populations. Yet Roman patience had limits. By 272 CE, Emperor Aurelian, having stabilized Rome's European frontiers, turned his attention eastward. A brilliant military commander, Aurelian recognized the existential threat Zenobia's empire posed. He led a massive force into Asia Minor, reclaiming territory and defeating Palmyrene armies in decisive battles at Imae and Emesa, modern Homs. Despite Zenobia's tactical acumen and her soldiers' bravery, Rome's superior numbers and Aurelian's generalship proved overwhelming. As Roman forces approached Palmyra, Zenobia made a desperate bid for freedom. Ancient sources claim she fled the city on a swift camel, hoping to reach Persian territory and secure alliance with Rome's traditional enemy. However, Roman cavalry captured her at the Euphrates River. With their queen taken, Palmyra surrendered. Initially, Aurelian showed mercy, sparing the city and taking Zenobia to Rome. But when Palmyra rebelled again in 273 CE, his retribution was terrible. The city was destroyed, its inhabitants slaughtered, and its magnificent architecture reduced to ruins. Zenobia's ultimate fate remains one of history's tantalizing mysteries. The traditional account from the Historia Augusta suggests she was led through Rome in golden chains during Aurelian's triumph, then either executed or allowed to commit suicide. Yet other sources indicate she married a Roman senator and lived out her days as a respected Roman matron in a villa at Tibur, modern Tivoli. Some evidence even suggests her descendants served in the Roman Senate for generations after her. This ambiguity has only enhanced her legendary status. The ruins of Palmyra stand today as testimony to the glory that once was Zenobia's capital. Before recent conflict damaged the site, visitors could walk among colonnaded streets, temples, and a magnificent theater where Zenobia may have addressed her people. Her brief but brilliant empire represents one of history's most remarkable challenges to Roman authority. In modern Syria, Zenobia remains a powerful symbol of national pride and resistance against foreign domination. Her image has appeared on Syrian currency, and her story inspires nationalist movements throughout the Middle East. Zenobia's legacy transcends mere rebellion. She represents a vision of cosmopolitan governance that respected cultural diversity while maintaining political unity, a model with resonance in today's complex world. Though her empire lasted only a few years, Zenobia of Palmyra earned her place among history's most extraordinary queens. In an age dominated by men, she created an empire through intelligence, courage, and vision. The desert queen who dared to challenge Rome lives on in history as a symbol of audacious ambition and the enduring power of a remarkable woman's will. Across centuries and continents, these powerful queens shared remarkable qualities: resilience, strategic brilliance, and unwavering determination. Though separated by time and culture, they navigated patriarchal worlds with exceptional skill, reshaping nations and leaving legacies that echo through history. Their stories remind us that women have always been pivotal forces in human civilization. Thank you for journeying with us through these royal lives. As you drift towards sleep tonight, imagine walking the palace halls of Cleopatra, discussing philosophy with Christina, or standing beside Boudica as she rallies her warriors. May these queens inspire your dreams and remind you of the extraordinary potential within us all. If you enjoyed these tales of remarkable women, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We'll return with more historical journeys to accompany your nights. Sleep well, dream deeply, and remember that history's greatest stories often belong to those who defied expectations.